Okay, shall we start? Good morning. Now the first one, in our last class, we have discussed about which all things in our last class? Now in our last class, majorly we have discussed about which all things? Majorly in our last class, we have discussed about exogenic forces. Now what do you mean by exogenic forces? What do you mean by exogenic forces? Now about our revision of our last class. Now when we are talking about revision of last class, we discussed about our topic called as which topic? Exogenic forces. Now what do you mean by exogenic forces here? Now exogenic forces means the forces which are being created by the earth above our surface of the earth, we call it as exogenic forces. Now when we are talking about exogenic forces, now what are the variants of exogenic forces we have? The first and foremost one, original rock undergoes what? Undergoes weathering. Or those weathered materials are being broken down into be called as smaller particles. And this we call it as weathering. Second one, we call it as the mass movements. Now what do you mean mass movements? The large sum of materials are being moved from one location to the other location. We call it as mass movements. Second one. The third major important one, we call it as, what is the third major important one? We call it as erosion and deposition. Now while talking about all those things, we have talked about which all things? First one, while talking about weathering, we have talked about what is weathering. It is reorganization or disorganization of the materials from one location to the other location, we call it as weathering. Now weathering happens via how many stages or how many factors? The three important, which are three factors? One we call it as physical or mechanical one, second one is chemical, and third one biological. This we have discussed. While discussing weathering happens via three important steps. One we call it as physical, chemical, and the third one we call it as biological one. Second one we call it as mass movements. What do you mean mass movements? Now mass movement means it is a large sum of materials are being moved from one location to the other with the influence of which one? Gravitational force. With the influence of gravitational force, we call it as mass movements. And the third one we have talked about our erosion and deposition. While talking about our erosion and deposition, now it is the erosion means removal of the materials from a particular location, we call it erosion. And deposition means addition of materials in a particular location, we call it as deposition. The sedimentation in a particular location, we call it as deposition. Now erosion and deposition happens via, it is 5 transportation agents. Now which is that 5 transportation agents we have? With respect to erosion and deposition? Which is that? Now majorly we have fresh water, second one we call it as salt water, third one the glaciers, underground water, and the last one we call it as the vents. These are 5 important factors. Now in last class we have discussed about the first one we call which one? The fresh water. Now when we are talking about fresh water, we have talked about erosion and deposition feature. Now under erosion and deposition feature, now we have talked about which all comes under erosion feature. We have talked about V-shaped valleys. Second one we talked about waterfalls. And the third one we call it as potholes, plunge pools. All these things come under where? Erosional features. And when we are talking about depositional features, we have talked about alluvial fans. We have talked about Barber region. We have talked about Terai region. We have talked about floodplains. We have talked about meanders. We have talked about oxbow lakes. we have talked about deltas. See, this has been organized from, we call it as, it is from majorly from second zone to the end of the zone. And while discussing about this running water, we have talked about three important, we call it as, it is the stages, and at three stages we call it stage 1, 2 and 3. This upper stage we call it as, upper stage is also called as stage of youth, or we call it as stage of erosion. And the third stage we call it as stage of deposition. It is also called as, we call it as the older stage. And last one, the middle one, we call it as, it's a stage of, we call it transportation. It is also called as what? It is also called as mature stage, where erosion and transportation happens. It is almost simultaneously, that we call it as the stage 3. Thus we have discussed about everything in our last class, that is about our revision of our exogenic forces. And the next one in today's class, we will discuss about, we call it as the second one, we call it which one? It is sea waves. Next one we are called as sea waves. Now whenever we are talking about sea waves, the first and foremost one, where can you experience this sea waves? Coastal regions. Now how many states comes under coastal regions? 9. Now how many union territories?
4.
It is 4 union territories. Is that 4? Puducherry. Next, Daman and Daman, Dadra, the Nagar Valley, all things, yes. Next, Jammu and Kashmir, Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar, which are the coast. See, Jammu and Kashmir, Tale mele the mail is now the coast. Okay, na 9 states and 4 union territories comes under. It is coastal zones. Now, which state borders or which state has a maximum coastal boundary? Gujarat. Now, second one, West Bengal. Second one is West Bengal. First is Gujarat has a maximum, we call it as coastal boundary, and second one we call it as, now understand this, now sea waves. Now sea waves, it's a transportation agent. It's a transportation agent which is popular in which zone? Popular in, we call it as coastal areas. Popular in, we call it as which areas or which zone? Coastal areas or near to the ocean areas. This we call it as coastal areas or we call it as oceans. Now whenever we are talking about the coastal areas, there are two types of coastal areas we have, or the two coasts we have with respect to our India. Now which are the two coasts we have with respect to India? East coast and west coast. Again, this east coast have been divided into 3 things, or majorly our west coast have been divided into some 3 to 4 things. Which is that division we have with respect to our coastal areas. Now observe, it's all things. Now this is about our coastal areas. Now these coastal areas are being divided into which one? Divided it into, we call it as, divided it into 2 things. One we call it as west coast, and second one we call it as east coast. East coast of India, west coast, and second one we call it as east coast of India. East coast of India. Then west coast, and second one we call it as east coast of India. Now when we are talking about, we call it as west coast. Now we have the 3 important coastal regions. We have 3 important coastal regions. One we call it as major. The 3 important one. We have, it is Gujarat coast. We have Konkan coast. We have majorly, it is Kerala coast and Malabar coast also. We have 4 things in our west. In our west we have 4, and in our east we have 3. One we call it as, it is Coromandel coast. We have northern Sirsas, and the last one we call it as Utkal coast. Orissa coast is normally called as Utkal coast, or in general it is called as northern Sirsa. Now observe one by one. Observe one by one here. Is that already? Now when we are talking about coast, I have said how many states? 9 states. 5 plus 4. 5 plus 4. Now this 5 plus 4 are being divided into which one? 5 plus 4 are being divided into, we call it as, first one we call it Gujarat coast. Gujarat coast. Now the Gujarat coast we call it as the Kutch and Kathiawar, or Kutch and Kathiawar. Kutch and Kathiawar, all those things put together, which one? Which coast is this? All this thing put together we call it as Gujarat coast. First one done. And second one, Maharashtra and Goa. Maharashtra and Goa, we call it as which one? We call it as only Maharashtra and Goa because it's up till here ashte. Maharashtra and Goa we call it as Konkan coast. Our Karnataka coast we call it as it is Canara coast, or we call it as now Canara coast, Canara, or we call it as Kannada coast, Kannada coast, or Kannada coast. And the last one we call it as now Kerala coast we call it which one? Malabar coast. The last one we call it as Malabar coast. Malabar coast. Malabar we call it as the coast. Done boss? Now this we call it as Malabar coast. Clear? Now this we call it as Gujarat coast, Kutch and Kataiwa region. And second one, Maharashtra and Goa we call it as Konkan coast, Kannada coast, Canara coast, Canara coast, and the last one, Kerala coast we call it as what? Malabar coast. And the next one, eastern one is being divided into three things. These are three things. Coromandel coast. Now normally it is half of Tamil Nadu and full of Tamil Nadu and half of Andhra. Put together we comes under which one? Which coast? Coromandel coast. Comes under Coromandel coast. You should note down in your class course. It is Coromandel coast. Second one we call it as majorly northern Sirsars. Northern Sirsars, half of Andhra and half of Odisha we call it as northern Sirsar. And the last one we call it as Utkal coast. Last one we call it as Utkal coast. Last one we call it as which one? Utkal coast. We also have Andaman Nicobar also has coast, and Lakshadweep also has coast. Lakshadweep near to which state? Kerala. Now this Lakshadweep belongs to which high court? Kerala High Court, Common High Court. Common High Court called as Kerala High Court. In the same manner, Andaman and Nicobar belongs to which High Court? Yeah. Which High Court? Options? Tamil Nadu High Court, Andhra High Court, Orissa High Court, Kolkata High Court. Now it belongs to Kolkata High Court. It belongs to the Common High Court called as Kolkata. Now whatever they complain, they need to go to the Kolkata, the Common High Court. Common High Court. That we call it as Kolkata High Court. This is about our first one. And the second major important one. Now when we are talking about, we call it as the coastal waves or the sea waves. Now where can you experience, which coast you can experience more amount of erosional feature, more amount of depositional feature, more amount of erosion feature and more amount of depositional feature? Is it in our west coast or in our east coast? Now why east coast? Now why east coast? Because I have already said the continental shelf is what? Very broader. Up till how many kilometers we have continental shelf? Now here up till we call it as now 200 kilometers we have continental shelf. But when we are talking about west coast, it is more of, we call it as which feature? Erosional feature. More amount of erosional feature. Why more amount of erosional feature? Why more amount of erosion feature? Depth is more. Continental shelf is what? Very narrower, and that we call it as narrow continental shelf. When there is narrow continental shelf, can we experience deposition here or can we experience erosion here? Which one? Erosion. Now if that is the case, can we form deltas here? Now what can we experience here? Estuaries. What do you mean estuaries here? Estuaries means meeting point of fresh water and the saline water, and that we call it as estuaries. Now in our west coast, we normally experience what type of it is formation here. Estuarine formation is being experienced because it has the rivers are being flowing towards the west, and we also have coast also, we also have oceans also, and this meeting point we call it as which one? Estuaries. Estuaries are being formed here. The meeting point we call it as estuaries are being formed here. Estuaries are being formed here. This we call it as estuaries are being formed here. Clear, boss? Estuaries are being formed. What about the east coast of India? Deltas are being formed. Perfect. What are different deltas we have seen already? What are different deltas we have seen here? It is majorly we call it as this delta. Ganga, Brahmaputra delta, it is popularly called as Sundarbans. Popularly called as Sundarbans, and majority of Sundarbans are present in which country? Bangladesh. What percentage? Now 2/3 percentage was present in, we call it as Bangladesh. Remaining 1/3 are present in where? West Bengal, Paschim Bengal. And second one we call it Orissa. We have a delta called as Mahanadi Delta. Again, it's a depositional feature. I had discussed yesterday itself. It's a depositional feature which is being created by which one? Running water. It is by the running water, and that we call it as Mahanadi River. And the third one in Andhra, we have two important rivers. The rivers that has been draining it into, we call it Bay of Bengal, and that we call it as KG Basin. Krishna Godavari Delta. And the last one in Tamil Nadu, we have a delta, which is a delta, Kaveri Delta. We are seeing the dispute with respect to all the rivers also. Be it with respect to Ganga, Faraka barrage, be it with respect to Godavari, we have a dispute between the Telangana and Andhra also, and along with Maharashtra also. We have Kaveri dispute. We also have with respect to Tamil Nadu, we call it as Mekedatu related projects. Balancing reservoir called as Mekedatu. This is a dispute we have with respect to our complete, we call it as, it is the eastern regions or the rivers which are flowing towards the Bay of Bengal. This we call it which one? Bay of Bengal. And this west one we call it as Arabian Sea. Towards the south of India we call it as Indian Ocean. At least basics you should be aware. With respect to, we call it as west coast, east coast, southern. It is southern part of India, you should be aware. And along with that things, now where you can experience, we call it as erosional feature, and where you can experience the coastal feature. That you should be aware. My third and basic question is, sir, in our west coast of India, erosion dominates. If the erosion dominates, now what is the application of the west coast? What is the application of west coast? Ports. Does it mean that no ports on the east? What's the application? Now application is, I agree, ports, but not a general ports, rather a natural ports are created. What is natural port here? Natural port means we can establish Aramsa without any bridging purpose. Naturally we can establish a deep water ports. Now whatever the ports are present until Karnataka, not with respect to Kerala, until Karnataka, all this comes under deep water ports. Take an example of, we call it as Deen Dayal Port, Kandla Port. Take an example of JNPT Port, Marmagua Port in Goa, or it can be, we call it as majorly our Mangalore Port. Now all those ports comes under where? All these ports comes under natural ports, deep water ports. Why natural ports? Because the sea waves carry all the eroded materials into back to the deep oceans. Now that creates a ground for, we call it as deep water bodies. When it is deep water bodies, even the deeper ships can reach near to where? Near to the coast, near to the land. It can aramse approach. And that's the application of, we call it as west coast of India. That's the reason you need to study about geography. In case if you have been posted as secretary to the ports and shipping, then what will you do? Now can you say to a boss who is an illiterate saying that who is an illiterate? You can say that, sir, in Mahabharata, deep water Mahabharata. Can we say that? And minister is more aware about all those things rather than you, because he has a practical experience. And he will say that the reason is you should know some geography here. The geography here is here the maintenance cost is very high. Here the maintenance cost is very minimal. Why? Because that maintenance is being done by sea waves. All the deposit metals are being carried out by, we call it as sea waves because of erosional feature. Whereas here, it is here, I'm not saying we cannot establish ports. We can establish. But the aspect here is, now to establish that ports, there is a huge amount of maintenance required. Continuously, once in a week, once in fortnight, once in 15 days, we need to go over continuous dredging. If not, no deeper ships can reach towards our coastal regions. Take an example of Titanic. Take Titanic ship, is it in West Coast or in East Coast? Where? Why? Because the continental shelf is what? More, it is narrower and the depth is more here. We can bring Titanic ship in case it is a but here it was very challenging. Because more amount of deposition, depth is very lesser. Clear? This is about our first one. This is about our the first and the foremost one. And the second one. Now the second major important one I have already said. Now what is the coastal length? What is the coastal length of India? Coastal length of India. How many kilometers we have with respect to our coastal length? Coastal length first. This is recent updated one. Be cautious. Now this is recent updated one. Now how many kilometers of coastline we have with respect to? We call it as India. How many kilometers? And which state has maximum coast? Now observe how many states we have. One, Gujarat in our west. Second one is Maharashtra, third, fourth, fifth. Now sixth, seventh, eighth and ninth. But how many union territories has coastal access? Now four, which is that? Daman, Diu, Dadra Nagar Haveli. Second one is Puducherry. Third one, Lakshadweep, and fourth one, Andaman Nicobar. Now they can ask the question saying that, now which state has a maximum coastal boundary? Now maximum coastal boundary, observe here, maximum coastal boundary is which one out of this? Out of this 9, which one has highest one? Gujarat. And second one? Now second one we call it as majorly, it is after updation. So this West Bengal is lesser now. Now we have highest amount, which one? Highest amount is Tamil Nadu, and we call it as, it is Andhra has the second highest part here. Second. Now what is the coastal area of, we call it as Karnataka? Now initially it was 320 kilometers. Be cautious here. Initially it was 320 kilometers. Now it has been increased to what? Sir, Aganta, it is close to Belgrade. It is majority was top. Or it is measurement top degree. Now we have upgraded into, we call it satellite based measurement. We have gone for satellite based measurement. And the other reason we have updated this measurement of the coastal areas also. Now here Gujarat is the maximum one, because Gujarat is the maximum one. Maximum one, in the same manner, which union territory has maximum coastal boundary? Now it is majorly we call it as Andaman and Nicobar as the maximum coast. Now the coast is more than which one? More than Gujarat also. In case if they ask, now which one has the maximum coastal boundary with respect to both states and UTs? Which one has maximum? Andaman. Second one? Second one is Gujarat. Third one? Tamil Nadu. Fourth? Andhra. That at least you should be aware. And the next major important one. Now with respect to our states, now which one has less coast? Which one has less coast, boss? Which one has less coast? Goa. Now with respect to union territory, which one has less coast? It is majorly we call it as Pondicherry as east. In states category it is Goa. In union territory which one? Pondicherry. And the second question is, sir, when we have a coastline, when we have a coastline, what's the advantage of it as coastline? What's the advantage of having a coastline? What's the advantage of having a coastline? This you should be, at least you should be aware. Now India has a coastline of around how many kilometers? Around we call it as 11,000 kilometers of coastline. Now under the major 11,000 coastline, which one has maximum one? Maximum one is Andaman. It is in states category, it is Gujarat. In states category it is Gujarat. What is the length of Karnataka? Length of Karnataka we call it as 343.3 kilometers is the length of Karnataka. Now the question is, now what are the advantages of having a coast? Why do we want to have a coast? It is first and foremost one. Now we can grow various, we call it as, it is the fishes, fish rearing. Second one, shrimp, prawns. And the third one we can go for extraction of oil, natural gas. And the third one we can go for establishment of ports, so that via the ports we can export our different products abroad. From Mangaluru we are exporting the different products to Middle East, to Africa, to America. Yes or no boss? Majorly. Now all these things are the advantages. Along with that things, we can also encourage tourism. Which type of tourism? Natural tourism, beach tourism, water related sports, scuba diving. Yes or no? Now various tourism can also be generated via, we call it as, via having a coast. And all these things are the advantages of, we call it as, majorly the presence of a coastline. Now how many states does not have coastline? How many states does not have coastline? It is 28 minus 9. We'll get the remaining. 28 minus 9 will get the landlocked states. And second one, how many UTs does not have, it is coastal boundary? It is 4. Because 8 minus 4, we call it as, remaining 4 we have a, it is coast, and remaining we call it as 4 doesn't have a coastal boundaries. Done boss? Done? In the same manner, this Daman and Diu. Daman and Diu jurisdiction belongs to which High Court? Daman and Diu belongs to which High Court? Bombay High Court. And this Pondicherry belongs to which High Court? Tamil Nadu. Done? All the things you should be aware with respect to, we call it as, with respect to the coastal axis. With respect to, we call it as the coastal axis. Done? Coastal axis. This is the major important one. We call it as the coastal regions. We call it as majorly the Gujarat, the Konkan region, Kannada region or Kannada region, and the second one or the next one we call it as Malabar, Coromandel, Northern Sisar, and last one we call it as Utkal regions. Clear boss? Now we will move towards our sea waves. Now when we are talking about sea waves, where can we experience sea waves? In coastal areas. Now how many coastal areas we have? West coast and we have east coast. Now when we are talking about west coast of India, now majorly we have 5 states which borders with west coast, and second one east coast we have 4 states borders with east coast. And out of that completely which one has maximum coastal area? It is Gujarat has the maximum coastal area, and with respect to union territories, Andaman and Nicobar has the maximum, we call it as coastal area. In and around we call it as Andaman has 3,000 kilometers and Gujarat has in and around we call it how many? It is 2,000 kilometers of coastline. And by having a coastline we can use it for generation of electricity, tidal energy, or it can be for the establishment of ports, or it can be for the tourism, or it is extraction of oil, natural gas, or it can be for fishing also. Now 5 important economic activity can be generated with respect to our west and east coast. But my simple question is, if you want to go for fishing, where can I go for fishing? West coast or east coast? Why east coast? More the deposition, more sediments, more it is vegetation, more fishes. Done boss? This you should be aware with respect to sea waves. And the second major important one given heading called as, now we'll be talking about, we call it as, now which all comes under erosional feature and which all comes under which one? The depositional features. which all comes under erosional feature, and which all comes under, we call it as depositional feature. We'll see all the things one by one. The first and foremost erosional feature, the first and foremost erosional feature, we call it as sea cliff. We'll see all this one by one, but first understand. The first one we call it as sea cliff anta kareeತೀವಿ. Cliff andre fault region or a fracture region. Second one we call it as sea caves. Now all these things, is it erosional feature or depositional feature? Erosional feature, sea caves. Third one we call it as sea arches. Sea arches. Fourth one we call it as a stack, and we call it as stump. Stack, and last one we call it as a stump. Done. Next one, when we are talking about depositional features, we will be talking about the first and foremost depositional feature, we call it as beaches. First and foremost one. Now beaches are depositional feature or erosional feature? Beaches. Is it depositional feature or erosional feature? Pakka? How can you say that depositional? Because we will be experiencing, we call it as sand, silt, gravels, all those things. It's a depositional feature. First one we call it as beaches. First one beaches. Second one, the second major important one we call it as the spit bar. Spit bar, or it's also called as pointed bar, or it's also called as offshore bar. All these things are same. Spit bar, pointed bar, offshore bar, all these things are same. Third one, the third one we call it as barrier island. Barrier island. Fourth one we call it as trombone. So all those things you might feel difficult, but let's see. I'll teach you in a simpler manner. We'll see all of them one by one. You should know about what are beaches. And second one I have said, it is majorly we call it as spit bar, offshore bar, or pointed bar, or it can be sand bar also. And the next one, the third major important one, we call it as barrier islands. And the last one we call it as trombone. You would have heard about Ramasetu or Adam's Bridge. Where is Adam's Bridge or it is Ramasetu? Between India and Sri Lanka. Now, my simple question is, leave aside religion. Now when we are talking about geography, now is it created by Rama? Though in our religion we believe that it is created by Rama, but it's a natural phenomenon. It's a natural phenomenon, though whatever may be outside it is religion. But when we are talking about it is called geography, this Stromboli is nothing but a Ramasetu. Now this Ramasetu, it has been created by the natural phenomenon rather than we call it as rather than. My simple question is, Rama ಕಟ್ಸಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಮುಳುಗಬೇಕಾಗಿದ್ದು ಇವಾಗ? See, ದೇವರು ಸಾಡಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ವಾ? It is ಮುಳುಗಬಾರ್ದಾಗಿತ್ತು. But the question are being asked by geographers are the same manner. Okay, we are not touching on the religious aspect, but when we are talking about geography, it is a geographical phenomenon. Now, this is submerging. Why it is submerged? Because of sea level rise. Because of rise in sea level. And this we call it Stromboli, connecting point between two mainlands. One is Sri Lanka, and between we call it as Indian mainland. And a connecting point we call it Stromboli, the Ramasetu. It's a deposition feature. It's a deposition created by, we call it as the sea waves. Stromboli, barrier island will see, spit bar, sand bar, offshore bar, pointed bar, all this in the same. Beaches, and Ilbandaga, it is stack, a stump, sea arches, sea caves, and sea cliff. Now, this erosional feature and depositional feature are being created by which transportation agent? Which transportation agent here? It is water, I convey which water? Now, sea water, or we call it as coastal waves. Now, the question is, now when we are talking about the coastal water, Does this coastal water contains only water, or it also contains some? It is majorly the sand, silt, and sediments also. What do you think? Sediments also. ಈಗ ನೀರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊಡೆದ್ರೆ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಇಂಪ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಥಿಂಕ್ ದಟ್ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮಣ್ಣನ್ನ ಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಹೊಡೆದ್ರೆ how will you feel? Will you feel the pain, or will you be ಆರಾಮ್ ಸೆ it is fine? It is pain ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಸೈಲೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತೀರಾ. ಮಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ನೀರು ಜೊತೆ ಮಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊಡೆದಾಗ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಇರಿಟೇಟ್ ಆಗೋದು ಬೈಯಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ. And other words, why? Because the water does not create much impact. I'm not saying it is not creating any impact, it also creates impact, but when this water is being mixed with the sediments, now when it is being mixed with sediments, automatically it has a huger impact. Now huger impact on which one? Huger impact on the original rocks which are present near to the coast. Yes or no, boss? Now when this coast, it has the original rock, if it is continuously being impacted by the sea waves, if it is continuously impacted by sea waves, will that rock be, it is static, or will it create a fault or a fracture region? It creates the fault or a fracture region, and that fracture region we call it as the sea cliff. What is sea cliff here? Sea cliff in a simpler manner we call it as, what is sea cliff here? Fracture region or a fault region which is being created. The fracture region or a fault region which is being created by which one? Created by the impact of sea waves, and that we call as what? Sea cliff. Now when the sea cliff widens, it leads to creation of which one? Leads to creation of what? Sea caves. When the sea caves widens, arches. When this arches, it has falls, automatically it leads to formation of stack and stump. I'll show you one image. See, geography is all about images. If you understand, it's a matter of time. So this, observe, carefully observe. Now, what did I say? Now, on one side we have it is a rock. On the other side we have a water. Now, when this sea water, if it is continuously impacting this rock, what happens? It leads to creation of a fault region. Now, the fault region we call it as, I have already said this is a fault. Now this fault region we call it as which one? Sea cliff. When this sea cliff starts to widen, it is sea caves. This lead to creation of, we call it as cave-like structure because of continuous erosional feature. All these are erosional feature. Now again erosional feature. Again this will make a hole, and when it is making a hole, it leads to creation of what? Arch, sea arch. Now it is again the water is continuously moving and it is leading to a fracture zone. Then this headland will start to break down and it will fall to the ocean. And this lead to a pillar-like landform. And that pillar-like landform we call it as stack. And it's straight eshtotirake sadhya. And again because of the way decay diagram move agi, this will start to break. And this broken, we call it as the stack. We call it what? Stump. It is coastal hoದಾಗ stump ನೋಡಿರ್ತೀರ. It is ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ rock ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. I'll show you all these things. Now, how this is being created? Now it is being created via the influence of, we call it as, see this. If you have gone to Malpe, we got a coastal regions, you would have experienced this. See this. Again, this is an erosion feature. See this. What is this? Stack. Yes or no? Now broken down one. See the stack. This is stump. Now all these are being created. All these are being created near to where? Near to the coastal regions. Near to coastal regions because of the influence of which one? Sea waves. Yes or no? Now these landforms are called as erosional landforms. See this? Stump, stack. I'll show you one realistic map that is called as Malpe Beach. Malpe, or it can be our St. Mary's Island. So this, all these are which one? It is stump and stack. Stump, stump. So this. Stump. You can aram walk, but you don't know how this rock created. Now this rock is being created via the coastal erosion, erosional landform. And erosional landforms are 5 in number. One is we have sea cliff, the fault region created because of the influence of we call it sea waves. And second one, the caves, expanded one we call it sea caves. It's like a cave-like structure, one entry and one exit. The same entry and same exit we call as caves. And one entry and other exit, arch. And if this arch gets broken down, leads to formation of which one? It is stack, and again because of the continuous, it is exposure to the nature, again it gets broken down, and that leads to we call a formation of a stump. Repeating it. Now, those 5 important features you should be aware with respect to we call it as majorly the coastal landforms. Coastal landforms. Okay. First one, large crack opened up by hydraulic action. Large crack opened up by the hydraulic action, we call it as? We call it as cliff. Which cliff is that? Sea cliff. Second, when this crack expands, the crack grows into a cave by hydraulic action, and we call it as erosional feature, aberration. We call it as aberration, and that we call it as which one? Sea caves. See, all these are erosional feature. Sea caves. Now, when the sea caves opens on the other, it is other path, and this we call it as sea arches. When this, now as a part of sea arches, when the headland breaks, this leads to formation of we call it as formation of we call it as a stack. Again, the stack breaks because of the wind movement, because of impact of hydraulic action, because of the water impact. Automatically it leads to formation of we call it as we call it a stack, and that eroded stack we call it as a stump. Note all those things fastest. Done. Next one, dividing called as depositional landform created by the sea waves. Depositional landforms created by which one? sea waves. Now comes our thing that we have a coast. Now, will the coast be plain? Will the coast, any coast, will it be plain? No. No coast will be plain because at some point of time, some point of location, there will be more amount of erosion. It is water is entering the land, more amount of erosion, and at some locations will be experiencing, we call it as, we will be experiencing, it is higher deposition, some location will be experiencing more, it is erosion deposition. And the coast will be in the form of which one? Undulating topography. And the second one we call it as, it is the waves are moving. Now when the waves are moving, it is carrying the sediments and it is depositing near to the coast. Depositing near to the coast. Now when the materials which are being carried by those water bodies and they are depositing near to the coast. And if it is depositing near to the coast and such a type of deposition, we call it as what? Such a type of landforms are called as what? Beaches. Okay, it. Such a type of landforms which are being created near to the, we call it as the coastal regions, and the depositional features carried by the sea waves, and that we call it as beaches. First and the foremost landform we call it as beaches. What is beaches here? The depositional feature created by the sea waves. It is created by the sea waves near to the coast. Near to the coast, we call it as beaches. Have you seen beaches? Yes. Now, is the beaches clean? Now, beaches is not clean. Why beaches is not clean? Because the sea wave starts to deposit the sediment near to the coast. Think that if it was erosional feature, how would have been the beaches? It would have been clean. Why it would have been clean? Because all the sediments are being carried into the ocean. If it is erosion, we will be experiencing clean beaches. And that is the reason when we go to Malpe, when we go to St. Mary's Island, when we go to Gokarna beach, we will be experiencing good beaches. Why good beaches? That does not mean that government is going for cleaning up of the beaches. Now the cleaning part has been done by, we call it as the natural process of erosion. And because of this natural erosion, we are experiencing clean beaches. And second one, when you go to the eastern coast, you won't feel such a good beaches. Why? Because here naturally it is not going for erosion, rather it is going for dumping of the waste materials, dumping of sediments. Now when it is dumping of sediments, automatically there will be more amount of, it is bad beaches rather than good beaches. But it is good for economy, bad for humans. But in West Coast, it is good for nature, bad for, we call which one? Bad for, we call it as good for human beings and bad for economic activity. Because we don't have any beaches there. Even if there are beaches, also narrow beaches. But in east coast of India, more dumping means the beaches won't be clean, but it is economically valuable. Why it is economically valuable? It will start to deposit huge amount of sand, huge amount of silt, huge amount of gravels, huge amount of pearls. Economically valuable. Humans, it is bad. We cannot go to tourism, but we can experience other things. But in West Coast, we can go for tourism, but it is not good with respect to our, we call it as major about our beaches. Fine? Clear? Okay. Next one, think that the first and foremost depositional feature which are being created near to the beaches. Near to the beaches, and that we call it as depositional feature, beaches are being formed. Example of beaches? Examples of beaches. Okay, other than this, other beach. Huh? It is Pondicherry is okay. Next. It is Panambur beach, okay. Now, whatever you are saying, now all these beaches is it good for tourism? No. Now there are few beaches who have been given a tag called as clean beaches tag. And that clean beaches tag we call what? Blue flag certification. And how many blue flag certification are being provided in India? Now which state has maximum blue flag? And the third question is, this blue flag certification is being provided by, now which organization? First one with respect to beaches. Now recently, be cautious here, recently it has 5 beaches from Maharashtra has been given a blue flag certification. Now be cautious. Now blue flag certification tag is being given by. Now blue flag certification is being given by, we call it as FEE. What is FEE? Fee. Now what is, we call it as the fee? Now fee means we call it as Foundation for Environment and Education. Now this is what I said recently. Now 5 Maharashtra beaches receives a prestigious international blue flag certification tag. Certification for a beaches called as Srivardhan beach, followed by it as major we call it as the 5 beaches from Maharashtra. 5 beaches from Maharashtra. It is Parnaka beach, it is Nagan beach, Srivardhan beach, it is Guhar beach and Ladghar beach from Maharashtra. Now by adding these 5 beaches, now total beaches are being increased to, we call it as 18 in number. Highly important one, this year's current affairs also. Highly important one. Now majorly this blue flag certification is being given by, we call it as, this blue flag certification is being given by, I already said, it is Foundation for Environment and Education. It is present, or it's an NGO. It's an NGO. Now it is Denmark based. Be cautious. It is Denmark based. Now it has been established in the year 1985. Now they give a blue flag certification based on, we call it as based on the 4 important broad criteria. 4 important broad criteria, and the broad criteria which includes cleanliness. It must be beauty and environmental sustainability and bathing cleanliness. Based on this, blue flag certification is being provided by an NGO. Now Denmark based NGO, and that Denmark based NGO we call it as a fee. What is fee here? Foundation for Environment and Education. Now on the same lines in India also we have a blue flag certificate on the same lines. We call it as beams. On the same lines, even Indian government also provides a tag called as beams. We have an aspect called as beams, and these beams are being given by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಿಸರಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಂಗೆ ಅರಣ್ಯ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, they provide a beams certification based on this criteria: environment education, water quality, bathing, safety and security, environmental safety. Based on this, India's beaches are being given a tag. Now from India, how many beaches are being got? It is, we call it, how many beaches are being got? We call it as, it is blue flag certification. Now we are being given, we call it as, it is 18 beaches are being given now. It is blue flag certification. Now from Maharashtra recently we have got 5. Copating it. Now which is the first, it is blue flag certification tag which has been given from Asia. Asia the first blue flag certification yavu. That we call it as Golden Beach. Observe, where is Golden Beach? Or we call it as Rushikonda Beach, which is present in Orissa. Golden Beach, or we call it as, majorly we call it as, now this was the first one, we call it as Golden Beach. Now from Asia, which has been given a first one from where? It is first one from, we call it as Asia, first in Asia. And after that later on we have Rushikonda Beach, we have another beach, Eden Beach, we have, it is Kolam Beach, we have, it is, there are different beaches across India. Now from Karnataka also we have 2 beaches. These are 2 beaches from Karnataka. One we call it as Padubidri Beach, and Kasarko Beach from Karnataka. Kasarko Beach and now observe all this in one by one here. First one observe. First one Golden Beach, which is present in where? Odisha, which is present in Odisha. Now it is considered with the Asia's the first blue flag certification. Asia's first blue flag certification. Second one observe from Andhra, Rushikonda Beach. Rushikonda Beach from Andhra Pradesh. ಫಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕಷ್ಟೇ, ಸಿಗಲ್ಲ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ. all these are current affairs. Rushikonda Beach in your atlas you can note down. You can take some khali slide tondo, you can give a heading saying that blue flag certification things. And the third one observe from Tamil Nadu. Observe it is Kovalam Beach. Kovalam blue flag certification, Kovalam Beach. And from Puducherry observe Eden Beach. And from Andaman and Nicobar we have Radhanagar Beach from Andaman and Nicobar. See, this is being taken up from PIB, majorly from PIB. This is PIB image, Press Information Bureau image. And the next one we call it as from Kerala, Kapad Beach. And from Lakshadweep, Bangaram Beach, Bangaram Island. And from Karnataka, I have already said Padubidre and Kasarkod Beach. Highly important. Padubidre and Kasarkod Beach, Sakkat important. Blue flag certification, wetlands, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. From three things, every year there will be questions. I have already discussed about UNESCO World Heritage Sites, but let's see, we discuss about wetlands also in the upcoming classes. I discuss about beaches also. See, I am touching upon current affairs also, though it's not a part of geography. See, my thing is not to cover only from geography. My thing is, and just questions for you. Because see, that is the outcome. See, in your examination, you have to get maximum questions. Now, majority questions are not being asked from the static portion, rather they are asking from the concept as well as current affairs, the recent trends. Now, recently 5 beaches. Now, they will ask a simple question saying that how many or which state is the maximum beaches, or maximum beaches which has got a blue flag certificate. Which is that? See, other than 5, no state has the maximum beaches. Hardly 2. Karnataka 2 maximum, but in Maharashtra we have 5. Forgetting it. Next one, it is from Goa. We have it is Miramar Beach from Goa. And from Maharashtra, I have already said. It is Bogave Beach. We have Srivardhan, Nagan. It is Parnaka Beach, Srivardhan, followed by Nagan Beach, Parnaka Beach, Guagar Beach, and Ladgar Beach. And from Daman Dio, we have Gogla Beach. Daman, Dio, Dadra, Nagar Haveli, we have Gogla Beach. And last one we call it as Shivrajpur Beach. In Pitkoli, Shivrajpur Beach it's in Gujarat. Srivardhan it's in Maharashtra. Shivrajpur Beach it's in Gujarat. First is Golden Beach and the maximum one is in Maharashtra. And it has been provided by which organization? An NGO, non-governmental organization which is based in Denmark. This you should be aware. Blue flag certification beaches. Sir, blue flag certification ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಯೂಸ್ಫುಲ್? ಏನು ಬ್ಲೂ ಫ್ಲಾಗ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ವಾಯ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ. ಏನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ? ನಾವು ಏನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇಂಟರ್ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ರೆಕಗ್ನಿಷನ್. First one is international recognition. Second one will get a funds from the different countries. ಇನ್ನು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಹಂಗೆ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. And the third major important one, we will be promoting or will be getting more amount of tourism. More tourism means more revenue for the beach. Ticket ಕೊಡಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. To go to beach, you need to get a ticket. Or they'll give an auction to some private organizations. The auction amount will vary or auction amount will start to increase. And automatically government will also get more amount of funds for the development or maintenance of the beaches. And the last one we call it as is this beach maintenance or is this blue flag certification. Is it a permanent flag or is it a permanent status? No. Once they lose the cleanliness, environmental safety, bathing capacity, and all those things, water quality, automatically the city will pull back that status. Nothing but every day you should maintain. If not, going down. Yes. Now, many of the good beaches, as you said, it does not have blue flag certification. Goa beach, majority Goa beach does not have blue flag certification. And second one, majority from we call it as it is Malpe beach. Majorly all those things are not being given a blue flag certification because you might be knowing about what is the quality of water quality and bathing quality in all those areas. ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಿಸಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಶರ್ಟ್ ಪ್ಯಾಂಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಿಸಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು it is ಬಿಸಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬಂದಿರ್ತಾರೆ. And when you go to all such regions you will see, and even with respect to ships also, most ships it is a leak of oil, the oil leakage followed by fuel leakage. See, you cannot experience, and there is no ecosystem also near the beaches. There is no good ecosystem, there is no fishes. Done. This we call it as blue flag certification. Status is being given at India level. We have 18 beaches. We have got it is 18 beaches. But ಈ ತರ ಇರಬೇಕು blue flag certification. ಅವಾಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ flag hoist ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. It is certifying saying that blue flag certification by fee. In the same manner, India also provides a status called as beams. And the beams are being provided by which one? The beams are being provided by, we call it as beams are being provided by, we call it as Ministry of Environment, and we call it as Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Majorly with respect to we call it as on the same lines of we call it as on the same lines of which one? On the same lines of we call it as this. What is beams? It is beach environment and aesthetic management services. We call it as beams. And the beams status are being provided by, we call it as Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Beams, beaches. Now, this at least you should be aware with respect to we call it as. Now, the beams we call it blue flag certification, and along with that things you should also know about blue flag certification also. And along with the things you should also know about what is this. It is what is majorly we call it as. What is majorly? It is what is coastal zone, buffer zone, and ecologically sensitive zone (ESZ), or exclusive economic zone. All these things you should be aware. What is endangered zone? What is coastal areas? What is exclusive economic zone? And what is we call it as? What is international waters? All these things you should be aware with respect to we call it as. Aware with respect to we call it as. This one. Clear? I've said Rishikunda beach or we call it as majorly we call it as the Golden Beach. All those comes under the first status to get up. It is beach status. Done this. Okay. Next one. It is we will move. And the next one, first one we call it as beaches. And for beaches, then second comes here is sir beach in the sand na ತಗೊಂಡು ಮಾರಾಕ್ ಬಿಡ್ಬೋದಾ? ಮಾರ್ಬಿಡ್ಬೋದಾ? ಸ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇರುತ್ತಲ್ವಾ, ಮರಳು ಗಣಿಗಾರಿಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ? Can we mine it and can we sell it? ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ವಾ? Now it is we can do it with the permission of government. We need to take an auction from the government under MMDR Act of 1957. What is MMDR? Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act of 1957. See, mining ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ, ಕಳ್ತನ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. Getting it. Nothing but why ಕಳ್ತನ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ? ಯಾಕೆ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ? Why we cannot go for it is robbing? ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ವಾ? ಯಾಕೆ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ? ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ಅಲ್ಲ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅವ್ರು ಯಾರು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ನಾನು ಆಳು ಇಟ್ಟಿರೋದು ನಾನು, ಟ್ರ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನಂದು ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ ನಾನು ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ನನಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲದರಲ್ಲಿ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಯಾಕೆ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ? ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆದರೆ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ತರ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆದರೆ ಹಂಗಲ್ಲ. ಸಿ ವೈ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಯಾಕಪ್ಪ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್. ನಾವು ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆದರೆ ಆಟೋಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕಲಿ ಇಟ್ ಕಮ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡರ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ದ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್. ಸರಿ, ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಓಕೆ. ಈಗ ನನ್ನ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಗ್ರಹ ಸಿಕ್ಬಿಡ್ತು. ಈಗ ಗಣೇಶನ ವಿಗ್ರಹ ಕುತ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದು ಹೊಟ್ಟೆ ಡುಮ್ಮಕ್ಕಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಒಂದು 10 kg ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಚಿನ್ನ ಸಿಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಈಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದು? ನಾನು ತೊಗೊಂಡೋಗಿ ಮನೇಲಿ ಯಾರು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ದಂಗೆ ಆ ಕಡೆ ಈ ಕಡೆ ನೋಡಿದೆ, ಯಾರು ನೋಡಿಲ್ಲ, ಮನೇಲಿ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಬಟ್ now the question is now either it can be our archaeological sources or it can be our natural resources. It belongs to whom? Archaeological Survey of India, again it comes to government property. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಈಗ ನಂದೊಂದು ಸೈಟ್ ಇದೆ, ಒಂದು 50-40 ಸೈಟ್ ಇದೆ. ಆ 50-40 ಸೈಟಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದರೂ ರೀಸೆಂಟಾಗಿ ರಿಮೋಟ್ ಸೆನ್ಸಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಚಿನ್ನ ಸಿಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಚಿನ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದ್ರು ಆಳ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ದಂಗೆ ಚಿನ್ನ. ಬಟ್ ಅದು ಕ್ವೆಶನ್ ಇಸ್, ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಐ ಕ್ಲೇಮ್ ದಟ್ ಇದು ನಂದು ಅಂತ? ಇದು ನಂದು, 30-40 ನಂದು, ನಾನು ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾವ್ದು ಅಧಿಕಾರ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಐ ಸೇ ದಟ್? ವೈ ನಾಟ್? ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸಸ್. ನಾವು ಮತ್ತೇನು ಸರ್ ನಂದು, ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಮತ್ತೇನು ನಂದು? ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಜಾಗ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಗೋದೆಲ್ಲ ನಂದೇ ಇರಬೇಕಲ್ವಾ? ಸಿ, ಓನ್ಲಿ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಿಮ್ದಷ್ಟೇ. In the future place of time, in case if the government feels that there is a huge amount of resources beneath your house, now the government has all the authority to rehabilitate you. Under, we call it as LARA Act of 2013. Under Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act of 2013. ಅವ್ರು ಸೆಟಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಇವಾಗ ಅದೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದಲ್ವಾ ಮೇಜರ್ ಆಗಿ. ಇನ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಇನ್ ಬಿಡದಿ ಟೌನ್ಶಿಪ್. ನಾವು ವಾಟ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ಲಾನಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಡೂ ದಟ್? ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಗಂಟು ಮುಟ್ಟೆ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಎತ್ತು ಸಾಗಾಣಿಕೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ. ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕು, ರಿಹ್ಯಾಬಿಲಿಟೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾ, ಮನೆ ಕಟ್ಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ನಾವು. ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇರಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ವೈ? ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ಡ್ ಸಿಟಿ there. I am going for a construction of it as the houses or infrastructure in the planned manner, so that this Bidadi will be, we call it as most advanced city in the future. Nothing but ಮೊದಲೇ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಸೀವೇಜ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾನು ರೋಡ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟು ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ಸೈಡಿಂದ ಹತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರಲ್ಲ. ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ಡ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎಲ್ಲದೂ ಕೂಡ ಸಿಲಿಂಡರ್ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಆ ಥರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೊಡಲ್ಲ. ಸಿಲಿಂಡರ್ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ ಮೊದಲೇ ಮನೆ ಇರ್ತವೆ. ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಬೈ ದ ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ಟಿ there, ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆರ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದ ಬಿಲ್ಡರ್ಸ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಏನು ಕಟ್ಟಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಆಗಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಟ್ ಬಿ ಅ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ಡ್ ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ಟಿ ಇನ್ ದ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್. ಸಿ, ವಾಟ್ ಎವರ್ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್, ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ಇಸ್ ಬೀನ್ ಸೆಟಲ್ಡ್. ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಗೋ ಫಾರ್ ಇಂಟೀರಿಯರ್ ಡೆಕೋರೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟೀರಿಯರ್ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಮುಟ್ಟಂಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. Now that is we call it a planned city. We are going for it. In the same manner, it is the natural resources. Be cautious. Natural resources is a people's property or a public ownership. If it is public ownership, no single individual has an authority to go for mining activity. If you want to go for mining activity, you need to get a permission from the government. If it is major, we call it as minerals are being divided into two things. One is called as major minerals and minor minerals. Now when it is major minerals, you need to get a permission from the central government, because central government has authority to go for auctioning. Take an example of coal ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಚಿನ್ನ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಯಾರಪ್ಪ ಆಕ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ? ನಾವು ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್. ಯಾವ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್? ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಸರ್ಕಾರದ್ದು. ವೈ ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್? ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಮೇಜರ್ ಮಿನರಲ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡರ್ ವಿಚ್ ಆರ್ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಟಜಿಕ್, ವಿಚ್ ಆರ್ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಅವರ್ ನೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ರಾದರ್ ದನ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಸ್ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅಂಥ ಒಂದು ಮಿನರಲ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಯಾರ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಸೆಂಟ್ರಲ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್. Under the control of, we call it as central government. And when it comes to minor minerals, take an example of sand. It is all this comes under sand, limestone, all these things comes under soil ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಈ ಸಾಯಿಲ್ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೇಷನ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಇಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಊರಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಮನೇಲಿ ಇದೆ. ಹೌದು ಇಲ್ವೋ? ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾವು ಹಂಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಾವು this will be regulated by, we call it as the state government. In the same manner, if you want to go for mining, ಗಣಿಗಾರಿಕೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಸ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅನ್ನ we need to get a permission from which government? State government. ಅದೇ ಈಗ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಹಟ್ಟಿ ಗೋಲ್ಡ್ ಮೈನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಹಟ್ಟಿ ಗೋಲ್ಡ್ ಮೈನ್ ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ. ಈಗ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಏನು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಸಿಗಬೇಕು. ಏನಾದ್ರು ಥಿಂಕ್ ದಟ್ ನಾನು ನಾಳೆ ಒಂದು ಕಂಪನಿ ಓಪನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ, ದಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ನಿಟ್ಟೂರ್ ಗೋಲ್ಡ್ ಮೈನ್ ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಅಂತ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಶ್ವನಾಥ್ ಸರ್ರೆ ಓನರ್ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೋಣ. ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜರ್. think that I want to go for mining tomorrow. Now can I go for auctioning or can I go for it is going for auction? ನಾನು ಆಕ್ಷನ್ ಹಾಕ್ತೀನಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅವ್ರು ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಿಡ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಬಿಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಸರ್ಕಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕು, ಯಾರು ನಂಗೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೋ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ನೀವೇನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಸಾಯಿ. Yes or no boys? Now why am I giving that auction amount to we call it as government? Because it's a natural occurrence. Natural occurrence comes under it is ownership of, we call it as governments. Which governments? Both the governments. Major minerals andaga central government, minor minerals andaga state government. That we are aware. And second major important one, sir naniga ಒಂದು auction ಗೆ 1000 ಕೋಟಿ ರೂಪಾಯಿ auction ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಈಗ. But ನಾನು 1000 ಕೋಟಿನ how can I get that in a particular year? ನಾನು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮೈನಿಂಗ್ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. It is I'll go for aggressive mining. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ 1000 ಕೋಟಿ ಬಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ ನಾನು. Now getting 1000 crores is a very challenging game because Hatti Gold Mines maximum profit ಎಷ್ಟು ಅಂದ್ರೆ 8000 or around 900 crore rupees is the profit. ಬಟ್ ನಾನು ಸರ್ಕಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ, 1000 ಕೋಟಿ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಇನ್ನೂ 100 ಕೋಟಿ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಬಟ್ ನಾನೇನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಅಗ್ರೆಸಿವ್ ಮೈನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಅಗ್ರೆಸಿವ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಮೈನಿಂಗ್, ಚಿನ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಚಿನ್ನ ಬರಬೇಕು. Yes or no? That I'll go. Now that is called as by auctioning, via the tender aspect I'll get an auction and based on that I'll go for a mining. Sir, ಹೆಂಗೆ ಬೇಕೋ ಹಂಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದಾ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ, when I'm going for auctioning there is a clear cut guidelines of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change also. And Ministry of Environment will say that ಈ ಇವರು ಕೊಡಬೇಡಿ ಅಂತ, Nittur ಕೊಡಬೇಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇ ಡಸಂಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ಮೈನಿಂಗ್ ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್. ಮೈನಿಂಗ್ ಏರಿಯಾ ಮೇಲೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ನಾನು ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ನೀವು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಯಾವುದು ನೀವು ಟೆಂಡರಾಗಿ ಕೊಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ? ಓಕೆ, ದೇ ಕನ್ವಿನ್ಸ್ ಸೇಯಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್ ಓಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ ಕೊಡ್ಬೋದು ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ದೇ ಗೇವ್ ಅಸ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಬ್ಯಾಗ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿನಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಮೊದಲೇ again some bags, some 100 crores ನೀವೇ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ನನಗೆ ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಕೊಡಿ ದುಡ್ಡು ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಓಕೆ ಅದೇ ಸೆಟ್ ದಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಆತ್ಮಹತ್ಯೆ ಕೊಡಿ ಅಂತ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಬಟ್ ನಾವು ಈವನ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ದಾಟ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಐ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಗೆಟ್ ಅನ್ ಎನ್ವಿರಾನ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಲಿಯರೆನ್ಸಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ. ಈವನ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ದಾಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಸ್ ರಿವ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಎನ್ವಿರಾನ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಲಿಯರೆನ್ಸಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ. ನಾವು ಈವನ್ ಇಫ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಇಂಪ್ಯಾಕ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಎನಿ ಅದರ್ ಸೊಸೈಟೀಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ, now I need to compensate them on continuous basis. And all such rules and regulations are being given by Ministry of Mines along with Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. It is there must be balance with respect to development and environment also. And that developmental balance we call it as sustainable development anta kariti. Sustainable development antandre it is not exploiting the resources for the present generation, we need to protect it for the future generation also. And that we call it as sustainable development. And the sustainable development concept were being given by Brundtland Commission in the year 1987 to 89. Brundtland Commission saying that the resources you should not exploit for the present generation, rather you should use it for the future generation also, or you should protect it for the future generation also. And that we call it as SDG. What is SDG here? Sustainable Development Goals. Now this SDG we need to achieve by which year? We need to achieve, we call it as 2030. Under this we have 17 goals and 169 targets. 17 goals ಇದಾವೆ, 169 targets ಇದಾವೆ. 16 it is majorly we call it as 17 goals and 169 targets we have. Now all those things you need to achieve by which year? Achieve by the year 2030. That's the main objective of we call it as Sustainable Development Goals target. Clear boss? Okay. Next comes our after coast. Now ಈಗ ಇಲ್ಲೂ ಡೆಪಾಸಿಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಿತ್ತು. ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮೇಜರ್ ಆಗಿ ನಮ್ದು ಒಂದು ಲೇಕ್ ಇತ್ತು. Now we had a lake. Now because of depositional feature, it is continuously deposited. Now if it is half deposited, where the movement of coastal water into this we call it as into this bay. This is bay region. This bay region. Now it is water movement into this bay region is being blocked by a depositional feature, and that depositional feature we call it as it is offshore bar, or it is being deposited by sandbar, or it is being deposited by spit bar. Yes or no boss? It is half enclosed adre we call it as spit bar. If it is completely closed, ಈಗ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಆದ್ರೆ ಏನಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ, ಇದನ್ನೆಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ವೇರ್ ದ sea water cannot enter into this bay, and this region we call it as lagoon. This region we call it as lagoon. Actually images, but first understand. Now the first one, there is a bay, and if it is half enclosed, and that half enclosed is being done by the depositional features, and that depositional features we call it as offshore offshore we call it as now offshore barrier, or we call it as pointed bar, or we call which one, sand bar or spit bar. Half enclosed, only half it is series can enter into this bay. Now over a period of time this is continuing depositing, it is completely blocking it, and that completely blocked one we call it as which one, blocked one we call it as lagoon. Blocked one we call it as lagoon. Now it is almost on the, it is parallel to this thing that there is an island. There is an island. Now if there is an island or there is a land, don't you think even our sediments also starts to deposit around we call it around the island? Take an example of Sri Lanka. We have Sri Lanka. Now around Sri Lanka there is a deposition also, and that deposition is acting as a barrier to this mainland. Yes or no, boss? And this island we call it as barrier island. Now it is acting as a barrier to this island, and this we call it as barrier island. Now if it is parallel to the coast, we call it what? Barrier island. It is barrier island. Now if it is perpendicular, illu kuda block ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ರೆ. If it is perpendicular to the coast, even if it is going for depositing, and it is acting as a connecting point between it is the mainland and the barrier island, and that we call it what? Stromboli. That we call it as Stromboli. All these are depositional features. Now I will show you the image. Now I will show you the images. That we call it as the coastal depositional features. Coastal depositional features. Observe this. We had a bay. Now this inlet is being closed. This bay inlet is being closed by. This inlet is being closed by depositional features. Now when it is partially closed or when it is semi-closed, when it is partially closed or when it is semi-closed, when it is partially closed or when it is semi-closed, now because of the movement of, we call it as the coastal waves, and this partially closed one we call it what? Partially closed one we call it what, boss? Spit bar. It's also called as sand bar. It's also called as offshore bar. It's also called as pointed bar. All those things are same. Now this is bay. This arda close adre adana sand close agtakana sand it is spit. If it is completely closed, where the water cannot enter, this we call as what? Lagoon. Now it is leading to formation of a lake-like structure. Lagoon anta kariತೀವಿ. It is a lake which is being created by sea waves, and that we call it as lagoon. And because of depositional feature, if it is parallel to, we call it as the coast. If it is parallel to coast, we call it as barrier island, parallel to the coast. And after parallel, if it is acting as a connecting point, ಇಲ್ಲಿ deposition feature ಆಗ್ತದೆ, connecting point ಏನು ಕರಿತೀವಿ? Stromboli ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. Connecting point with Stromboli, and this we call it as beaches. Done, boss? Now done. On the same, I'll give you some more examples. That we call it as Stromboli. Then beaches. We have talked about blue flag certification. We have talked about beams also. And second one, spit bar, sand bar, or offshore bar. We have seen that. And we have talked about lagoons. If it is completely blocked with respect to where the ocean water cannot enter into this bay region, and that we call it as the lagoons. Example of lagoons we call it as The largest lagoon of India we call it Chilka Lake. Observe Chilka in Odisha. Go to page number 14, you will get. Page number 14, lagoons. Chilka Lake. It's a lagoon, largest lagoon. India's largest lagoon is lagoon. India's largest lagoon is Chilka Lake, which is present in where? Odisha. Present in Odisha. And you can also experience Pulicat Lake, the border between Tamil Nadu and Andhra. Pulicat Lake. Now Pulicat Lake, within this Pulicat Lake we have the major important one we call it as. Now Sriharikota. Sriharikota, we have an island called as Sriharikota. Pulicat Lake. First one, Pulicat Lake, observe. Now go to specific map of Andhra and Tamil Nadu. Go to specific map of Andhra and Tamil Nadu and observe. Highly important UPSC question, Pulicat Lake. Go to specific map. That is present on border between the two important the states. Fast. Pulicat Lake is considered the second largest brackish water lagoon in India after Chilka. Second brackish water lake. Present on the border between which one? Present on the border between Andhra and we call it as Tamil Nadu. Andhra and Tamil Nadu. Andhra constitutes 96% of area. Andhra constitutes along the Coromandel coast. Andhra constitutes 96% of area and Tamil Nadu constitutes, we call it as 4% of the area. Now the majority are present in this state. Andhra Pradesh. Third one, observe within this Pulicat Lake we have a Sriharikota. Within this we have a Sriharikota. Now from here we are launching the different, we call it as, we are launching which one? We are launching the payloads also. We are launching the satellites also. That we call it as Satish Dhawan Space Center Sriharikota. Satish Dhawan Space Center Sriharikota. Satish Dhawan Space Center Sriharikota ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. Done. Satish Dhawan Space Center Sriharikota. It is considered the second largest brackish water lagoon in India after, we call it as after Chilka Lake. Clear boss? After Chilka Lake, that you should know, it is both the lagoons majorly are being formed on east coast. West coastal you cannot experience lagoon. Why not lagoon? Why? Because lagoons are being formed because of deposition features. Whereas when we are talking about west coast, it is more of erosion feature. There is very minimal of deposition feature. That's the reason no lagoons. It is again we call it as the estuaries are being formed. Estuaries are being formed. Clear boss? And next one observe. It is Pamban Ramasetu. It's also called as Adams Bridge. Pamban Bridge. Now recently we have established. It is vertical, the railway bridge, and that we call it as Pamban Bridge. The Pamban Bridge, Rameshwaram. Pamban Bridge, Rameshwaram. Recently it was inaugurated by Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That is considered to be which one? India's first vertical lift sea bridge. ಮೇಲ್ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಶಿಪ್ ಹೋಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಮೇಲ್ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ರೈಲ್ ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಪ್ಲಾಟ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. That is ನೋಡಿದಿರ ಅದನ್ನ. That is we call it as the vertical bridge, that is called as Pamban Bridge. That is we call it as Pamban Bridge. Now India's first vertical bridge ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. India's first vertical bridge. See? India to Sri Lanka. Done. Now we are talking about this Paman Bridge. Now this Paman Bridge is considered it is India's first. It is vertical left bridge. Vertical left bridge constructed by the Ministry of Railways. Constructed by Ministry of Railways under the ministership of it is Ashwini Vaishnav. Ashwini Vaishnav. Done. Rameshwaram ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡದೆ ಅಂತ ಬರಬೇಡಿ. It is very beautiful. ಸಕ್ಕತ್ತಾಗಿದೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಆದರೆ ಶ್ರೀಲಂಕಾಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಬನ್ನಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. You can also go to Sri Lanka also without any visa, and as a tourist you can go and you can come back. It is ಗೊತ್ತಿರಲಿ. Now we have our vertical bridge, and in Tamil Nadu we also have a glass bridge. India's first glass bridge. Now glass bridge ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಮೂರು ನದಿ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ, or the three important seas. One is on one side Arabian Sea, one side Bay of Bengal, front ಗೆ Indian Ocean. That's a glass bridge that was present in it is Tamil Nadu. And the beautiful one. ಹೋಗಿ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಇವಾಗ ಬೇರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೋಸೆಫ್ ವಿಜಯ್ ಬೇರೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. It is very, he has maintained very clean now. Now the posters, all the posters are being removed in Tamil Nadu. There is no posters concept now. And second one, there is no blockade with respect to the roads. Even the minister or the CM is coming, there is no complete blockade. And other blockade, our ministers ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ, ಮಿಕ್ಕಿದ ಅರ್ಧಕ್ಕಂತ blockade, we can use it. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ತರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ರತಿದಿನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ it is ದೇವನಹಳ್ಳಿಯಿಂದ ಪ್ರತಿದಿನ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್. ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಆ ಪೊಲೀಸರು ಯಾರು ಗೊತ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ, ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ. ಏನೇ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು ಸರ್ ಯಾರೋ ದೊಡ್ಡವ್ರು ಬರ್ತಿದಾರಂತೆ, ಯಾರು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ದೊಡ್ಡವ್ರು ಬರ್ತಿದಾರಂತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋಲ್ಲ ದೊಡ್ಡವರೇ ಅಲ್ವಾ. ದೇವನಹಳ್ಳಿಯಿಂದ ಆಟೋಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕ್ ಗೆಲ್ಲು. See, that should not impact any civilian population. That should not impact civilian population. ಅಷ್ಟು ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಅಷ್ಟು ಕಾಮನ್ ಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಇಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ ಇದೆ, ನಾವು ಅದು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ದೇ ಆರ್ ಬ್ಲಾಕಿಂಗ್ ಆಲ್ ದ ರೋಡ್ಸ್. ಅದು ಓಕೆ, ಬಂದಾಗ ಒಂದು 2 ನಿಮಿಷ 10 ನಿಮಿಷ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಆಯಿತು. ಅರ್ಧವ್ರು ಒನ್ನವರಿಂದ ಬ್ಲಾಕ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಯು ನೋ ವಾಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇನ್ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸರಿಗಿದ್ರೆ ಟ್ರಾಫಿಕ್ ಜಾಮ್. ಬಟ್ ಥಿಂಕ್ ದಟ್ ಇಫ್ ಸಮ್ಮನ್ ಹಸ್ ಕಮಿಂಗ್, so that is a major problem we are seeing in. It is that we call it as the lagoons concept, the Chilka Lake, and second one we call it as the Plicat Lake, and we have talked about it is Tromboli also. It is Rama Setu, or it's also called as Adams Bridge. Adams Bridge, so see, this is called a common bridge, and we will also talk about Adams Bridge. Now Madhu it was called as Ram Setu anta kareetiದ್ವಿ. Now like after Britishers came into India, it is Rama anta ಕರಿಬಾರದು ಅಂತ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ it is they renamed it as Adams Bridge. See this, it is Adams a bridge, or we call it as Rama Setu. Ram Setu now majority has been submerged, but you can experience that. And Rama kattadakanda you can experience little bit. It is where it is the stones are floating above the sea. Now how come the stones can float above the sea? How? Because density of those rocks will be very less, and that is the reason it is floating. We call it above the water body, and that we call it as Rama Setu. Okay, now this we call it as Ram Setu. You should know about this Ram Setu. It's also called as Adams Bridge. It's also called as Adams Bridge. Connecting which two countries? Connecting we call it Tamil Nadu with Sri Lanka. And we have seen we have a dispute between Sri Lanka and it is Tamil Nadu continuously, because ಎಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಫಿಶರ್ಮನ್ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು ನಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೆ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಫಿಶರ್ಮನ್ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಾ, ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆ ಕಡೆ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮೀನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ ತಮಿಳ್ನಾಡು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಕಡೆ ಶ್ರೀಲಂಕಾ ಅವ್ರು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಈ ಕಡೆ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮೀನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ, ಕಳ್ಳರು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಬಿಡ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ they'll feel that okay ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮೀನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ those Indians will feel that okay ಶ್ರೀಲಂಕಾ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮೀನು ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. But that is leading to a problem. ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ when the Tamil Nadu fishermen process this international dateline or we call it international, we call it as borders, automatically they're being captured by the international police and they put in a bus. But what is the meaning of the and they'll put in a bus. And even India also the same thing. Number arrest ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ಬನ್ನಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ತಮಿಳುನಾಡು ಅವರು. Anyways, they are relatives. ನಮ್ಮ relatives arrest ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ಬನ್ನಿ ನಾವು ಇಟ್ಕೊತೀವಿ ಒಂದು ವಾರ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ವಾರ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ they release. And this has become a major problem with respect to India and Sri Lanka, the fisherman's issue. And second problem ಏನು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ರಾಮ ಸೇತುವನ್ನು ಹೊಡಿಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು the present government is planning. The central government ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಪ್ರತಿ ಬಾರಿ ಶ್ರೀಲಂಕಾ ಸುತ್ತಾಕೊಂಡು ಬರಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ವಾ. Now think that if you want to migrate from or if you want to move the ships from, it is Bay of Bengal to we got Arabian Sea or Arabian Sea to Bay of Bengal. Now I need to move to the deep south, Sri Lanka and then to come. ನೋಡಿ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ ನಿಮಗೆ. Open India and Sri Lanka first. So this India and Sri Lanka. Now I want to move from it is Arabian Sea to Bay of Bengal, move. But if you want to move to this Bay of Bengal, how to move? I need to go to deep, it is Sri Lanka and I need to cross this. Now ನಮಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟೇ ದೂರ ಅಲ್ವಾ ಸರ್ ಆರಾಮ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ now to see this is very small distance but to cross it takes minimum 3 to 4 days. ಬಟ್ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಈ ಫಿಶರ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಅವರು ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಸೇಯಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್ ಹಿಂಗಿಂದ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಹಿಂಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. But it is ವಿಷಯ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. ನಾವು ಕೊಲಂಬೋ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ it is going for breaking this Ram Setu because only country where it is Rama is being hated ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ it's in Colombo. It's only in Sri Lanka. And second major important, what is the reason for this ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ because Rama attacked Sri Lanka and he killed Ravana ಅಂತ. Because Ravana is also God in Sri Lanka. They have been worshipping. See, Ravana is not bad. It is one issue made him bad. But he was also good. But he worship ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರು, ನಮ್ಮನೆ ಬಂದು ಅಟ್ಯಾಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮನೆ ಬಂದು it is ಸಾಯಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇವರನ್ನ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು they hate Rama. And ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ರಾಮ ಕಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಆಗಿರಲಿ ಹೊಡೆದಾಕೋಣ ಅಂತ. But this was being opposed by India. Saying that how can you guys do it? It is ನಮ್ಮ ಸಿಂಬಲ್, ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ಗೆ ಇಂಪ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. And ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ the Sagarmala project has been shut down. It's been cancelled because of huge amount of the strike which has been taken up by the government saying that Sri Lanka whatever they are doing it is very wrong, they should never do it. And the route continues. Done. This we call it as you should know here we have a Park Strait here. Observe Park Strait, we have Gulf of Mannar or Gulf of Mannar. And also observe island which is in dispute, we call it as island which is in dispute. Kachativu island, it's in dispute because with respect to we call it as India and Sri Lanka. India and Sri Lanka we have a dispute and that dispute we call it as Kachativu island. Kachativu island ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. Kachativu island it's a dispute between India and Sri Lanka. Done? Yep. And you also observe about Park Strait, what is strait here? A narrow water body which is connecting to larger water body that is called a Bay of Bengal with Arabian Sea or Indian Ocean. And separating two land masses is the land masses India and Sri Lanka. And that we call it as which one? It is strait. And observe Gulf of Mannar. And this Gulf of Mannar has been declared as we call it as India's first marine biosphere reserve. Marine biosphere reserve under map. Marine biosphere reserve under map. What is map andre? Mad alla. Map. What is map? Man and biosphere reserve. Done? Is it fine? Man and biosphere reserve. ಕನ್ನಡ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ? ಓಕೆ ಓಕೆ. ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಬಯೋಸ್ಫಿಯರ್ ರಿಸರ್ವ್. And the same thing used to happen in Delhi. When we were in coaching in Delhi, the faculty used to make some jokes in Hindi. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಹಿಂದಿ. ಅವಾಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದು, ನಗಬೇಕು. ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ನಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಈ ಯಾರಪ್ಪ ದೊಡ್ಡರು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೋತಾರೆ. ಆಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿಂದಿ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇರೋರಲ್ವ, ಅವ್ರು ನಕ್ಕರೆ ನಾವು ನಗೋದು. Because we were not understanding any jokes. They used to make some fun. It is Madhya on some 10 or 15 minutes. They used to make some jokes. And during that period of time, it was Aam Aadmi Party. Aam Aadmi Party was in power. Now it was replaced by BJP. And the last 10 years, it was Aam Aadmi Party. But aವಾಗ Aam Aadmi Party against like used to make some fun. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. Only like we used to get to know that okay, some Aam Aadmi Party jokes ಅಂತ. And later on, we learned Hindi. And by the end of the term, we used to feel like okay, ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ. And that is the situation in Delhi. See that like in Delhi, it is living in Delhi is very tragic situation. Because any can take it you cannot go out. You might feel like you might say to everyone saying that I am in Delhi, but you cannot go out. If you go out in the winter, it is very cold. It is some 15-13 degrees. And second one in summer, summer wait ಮಾಡಂತ ನಾನು ನಾವೇನು ಸಮ್ಮರ್ ಹೋಗೋಣ ಬಿಡು ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ಅಂತ. But in summer, it is 40 or 45 degrees. ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದು? ವಿಂಟರ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನಾಟ್ ಗೋ, ಈವನ್ ಇನ್ ಸಮ್ಮರ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನಾಟ್ ಗೋ. ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ವಿ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಲೆಟ್ಸ್ ಗೋ ಇನ್ ದ ನೈಟ್. ನೈಟಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮಾಡರೇಟ್. ನಾವು ದಟ್ಟು ವಿ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಯಾವ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಜಾಗ್ರಫಿ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಯಾವ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ಫ್ರಮ್ 6 to 8 ವಿ ಶುಡ್ ಗೋ ಔಟ್, ಎಸ್ಕೇಪ್ and we'll come back. See, without ACs you cannot stay in Delhi. That is the situation we are experiencing. And if you are staying in Delhi, it's like almost seem like it is now having 40 cigarettes per day. As a pollution we will be experiencing in Delhi. And prime ministers, the ministers will be safe, but the common person will be impacted more. And the more amount of problem will be experiencing in Delhi is the bronchitis. And that in the month of winter you cannot go out. One is extreme climate, and second one is we call it as the major because of stubble burning. Because of stubble burning, huge amount of pollutants in Delhi. And that too in Delhi there are two Delhis. One is Naya Delhi and it is Old Delhi. And it is very cheaper. It is New Delhi is very good and very good infrastructure. And it is if you go to New Delhi you will get good infrastructures. Qutub Minar, you will get majorly at a Red Fort. You will get the Rashtrapati Bhavan, Prime Minister's office, North Block, South Block. See, all the things are good infrastructures. And Naya Delhi, in Old Delhi it is very slums. See, in Delhi itself we have a distinction. And like near to that Old Delhi we had a huge hill. And I thought that it might be Raisina Hill. But later on while coming back I got to know that it's not a hill, it's not a Raisina Hill, it's not a, it is we call it as Aravalli Hills, rather it's a plastic dump yard. See, that is the situation we are living in Delhi. Delhi, though it is capital, it is only few part, the core part, the center part is developed. Like Bangalore. The center part of Bangalore it is developed and the rest is slums. The rest is underdeveloped, lack of basic and essential necessities. And the same thing applies to it is Bombay also. In Bombay the more slums. And the people will say that I am in Bombay, but it is majority of them are slums because there is no lack of essential facilities. Same thing applies to Kolkata. Kolkata goes into worst. Britishers ಕಟ್ಟಿರೋ ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ಏನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಏನು ನೋಡೋದು ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮಮತಾ ದೀದಿ ಮಾಡಿರೋದಲ್ಲಿ no Mumta Didi's contribution. And other reason even in Kolkata also the people got fed up. What is contribution by CPI? Contribution done by we call it as Mamata Banerjee. Continuously, it is now she was a chief minister before to that CPI. And there is no contribution except we call it as except people were becoming poorer and poorer because everything is free in Kolkata. But now this year it is BJP gave us a good ideology and saying that no matter what we will come to Bengal, and they added a footprint in Bengal also, and now they got a sweeping majority. Nothing but people they don't want freebies also. People beat any party. The people are mature. It is though they expect freebies, but to some extent they also expect it is development also. See, think about it as Kolkata was one of the richest state since the British times was. Since the British left, it was the one of the most developed state. But now Kolkata is not even in the top 10. The same thing applies to Tamil Nadu also. It is DMK, ADMK, they were doing huge amount of politics saying that Nave Dravidians are. But in the name of Dravidian, they were exploiting the people, it is making the huge amount of richer families, the lineage. Think about Tamil Nadu was one of the most provincial, the developed provinces during the British times. But after independence, now it is almost on the 6th or 7th state. But think about UP, think about Punjab, think about Haryana. Though they were not even in the top 10th rank during British times, now they are developing it. Think about Telangana, Andhra. See, think about in Andhra and Telangana, whatever the initiatives they take, they work towards the people. That's the reason it is without development, without it is efficiency, it is no state can get developed. No state can get developed. It is freebies cannot survive for a long period of time. And that freebie started in Tamil Nadu. And over a period of time, we lost the completely. Now, take an example of recent election itself. DMK, ADMK, they lost. It is heinously lost. And think about Vijay. Now, it's not about Vijay who has created a party in 2 years and he has become a CM. Because people were expecting some change. And that change got it from Vijay. And I'm not saying that Vijay will completely change it, but there's a ray of hope. There's a hope which has been created in the minds of the people. See, that is what it is. It brings a change. And when you go to Tamil Nadu also, it is I was Tamil Nadu during election day. It is now in election day also. There was no flex, there was no rallies, there was nothing. It is Vijay won, it is everyone happy. It is saying that okay, it has some hope. No rallies, no protest. But think that if it was ADMK or DMK, they would have given a call saying that Machan and flex hakro ella kadanta. Who are getting it? See, leader does not expect fame. Leader creates the other leaders, future leaders. Now, who is the leader in DMK and ADMK after Jayalalitha? No leaders. They are fighting, they are factions within the party. And who is the leader after Karunanidhi? No leaders. His son Stalin, he does not know how to behave. It's the other person and he slaps the normal people in the public. And his son, it is Udayinidhi, it is Stalin. Automatically it is the lineage. See, leaders are not being born, leaders are being created because of their attitude, because of their maturity, because of how the people, that's how we take the people along with our own parties, ideologies. Hope you're getting it. See, every state, take an example of Kerala also, up till now we had CPI, now we have seen Congress under a new regime. And even in Karnataka also we had BJP, now Congress. I think, but this clearly shows that people are not, very much interested into this freebies. Namgeno 3,000 ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಶ್ರೀಮಂತ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡಲ್ಲ. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀಲಕ್ಷ್ಮಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮಿ ಯೋಜನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ. It is now Gೃಹಲಕ್ಷ್ಮಿ ಯೋಜನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ it is 2,000-3,000. Will it make a difference? No. But we expected some change. We expected some ideological differences. We don't want communalism. We don't want the conflicts between the different religion or the different caste or the people. We want some peacefulness. We want employment. See, ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಬೇಕು, ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಬೇಕು, ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಬೇಕು, ಅಷ್ಟೇ ನಾವು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದು. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಓಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಜೊತೆಗೆ ರೋಡ್ಸ್ ಸರಿಗಿರಬೇಕು. ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ವಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್. ಎನಿ ಸಿಟಿಸನ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ದಿಸ್. ಅದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೇನೋ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಿ ಎಂ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ, ನಮ್ಮವ್ರು ಸಿ ಎಂ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಏನೋ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. See, this at least they need to fulfill. And when you go to Bengaluru, majority of the Bengaluru, it is potholes. ಫಿಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನು ಕಚ್ಚಡವಾಗಿದೆ. ಥಿಂಕ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲೇ ಹಿಂಗಿರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ, ಥಿಂಕ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಔಟ್ಸೈಡ್, ಥಿಂಕ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಉತ್ತರಾಖಂಡ್, ಹಿಮಾಲಯನ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಸ್, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಟೆರೇನಲ್ಲಿ ಕಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಥಿಂಕ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಉತ್ತರ ಕನ್ನಡ ಡಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಕ್ಟ್. ಉತ್ತರ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಕುಡಿಯೋಕ್ಕೆ ನೀರಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಸ್ ಕೆಲಸಗಳಿಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಸಿಚುವೇಶನ್. ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ರಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಇಸ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್. ಈ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಕ್ಕತ್ತಾಗಿದ್ದಾವೆ. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಾ, ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಪರ್ಚೇಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ, ಅವಾಗ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ. ನೀವೇ ಒಂದು ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ಕೊಡಿ ನೋಡ, ಅಥವಾ ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನೋಡ, ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡದೆ. ಸಿ, ಕೋಚಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಗುಡ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಪೇಯಿಂಗ್ ಮನಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಪ್ರೊವೈಡಿಂಗ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್. ಬಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅ ಸರ್ವಿಸ್ ನಾವು ಇವತ್ತು ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ KPTC ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ BDS ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಮಚಾ ನನ್ನ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಯಾನಿಟೇಷನ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ನೋಡಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಫಾಸ್ಟ್ ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೋ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ಡಿಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಗವರ್ನೆನ್ಸ್. ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಗ ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಗವರ್ನೆನ್ಸ್ ಡಿಸೈಡ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. Hoping it. Now it is now when you know all those practicality, when you get into a service, now you will serve for people. See, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಹತ್ರ ದುಡ್ಡಿದೆ, ನಾವು ಯಾರ ಹತ್ರ ದುಡ್ಡಿಲ್ಲಾದ್ರು ಈಗ ಯಾರು ಬಡವರೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಟು ಬಿ ಫ್ರಾಂಕ್, ಯಾರು ಬಡವರು? ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಆನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಅಟ್ಲೀಸ್ಟ್ ಮಿನಿಮಮ್ ಒಂದು 5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಮೇಲಿದೆ. ಒಂದು ಬಡವರು ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಕೂಡ 5 ಲಕ್ಷ ಮೇಲಿದೆ. ಒಂದು 25,000 ದುಡಿದ್ರೆ ಅಟ್ಲೀಸ್ಟ್ 25,000 3 ಜನ ದುಡಿದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟಾಯ್ತಪ್ಪ? 5 lakh ಕ್ರಾಸ್ ಆಯ್ತು. ಬಟ್ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಇಸ್ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಮಾನವೀಯತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಹ್ಯುಮ್ಯಾನಿಟಿ ಇಸ್ ಲ್ಯಾಕಿಂಗ್. ಈಗ ನೀವೇ ನೋಡಿ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಹೆಣ್ಣು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಗಂಡು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ನೋಡ್ತೀವಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಆಸ್ತಿ ಇದೆ, ಒಬ್ಬನೇ ಮಗನ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಸಾವಿರ ಚಿನ್ನ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ನೋಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಕಾರ್ ಇದೆಯಾ, ಬಂಗ್ಲೆ ಇದೆಯಾ ಎಲ್ಲ ನೋಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಬಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕೆಲವು ಚಟಗಳು ಇದಾವೆ. ಶನಿವಾರ ಆದ್ರೆ ಬಾರ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾನೆ, ಶನಿವಾರ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬರಲ್ಲ, ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ ಭಾನುವಾರ ಬರ್ತಾನೆ, ಸಾಯಂಕಾಲ ಹೋಗ್ತಾನೆ, ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ನಾವು ಆಲ್ ದಿಸ್ ಬಿಹೇವಿಯರ್ಸ್ ಯಾರು ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ನಾರ್ಮಲೈಸ್ ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್. ಕುಡಿತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದು, ಕುಡಿದ್ರೇನೆ ಒಬ್ಬ ಮನುಷ್ಯ, ಕುಡಿಯಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಒಂಥರ ಅಸಹ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಏನಕ್ಕಾರ ಜೀವನ ಬರ್ತಿದೀವ ನನಗೆ. ನಾನು ಕೆಲ್ಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಮನೆಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟ ಬೇಗ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀಯಾ, ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಹೋಗಲ್ವಾ? ಗುರು ನನಗೇನು ಇಷ್ಟ ಆದರೆ ನಾನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ನಾವು ಈ ಥರ ಒಂಥರ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ನಾರ್ಮಲೈಸ್ ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್. ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಪಬ್, ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಬಾರ್ಸ್, ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಮಾಲ್ಸ್, it is wearing some western clothes and all those things we have normalized it. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಮನುಷ್ಯರು ಎಲ್ಲ ನಮಗೆ. See, westernization or it is some Indian culture does not happens via expression. It happens via thinking. ಹೆಂಗೆ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಹೇಳೋದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಥೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಬಟ್ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಚೈಲ್ಡ್ ಮ್ಯಾರೇಜ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ರಾಯ್ ಥರ, ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ರಾಯ್, ಈಶ್ವರ ವಿದ್ಯಾಸಾಗರ್, ಇವ್ರು ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರೀಚ್ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು ಬೇರೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಲೈಫೇ ಬೇರೆ, ಅವ್ರು ಓದೋಗೋದ ನಮಗೆ. Nothing but it is whatever you think, it is that you should speak, that you should act. All these three things should be in alignment. That should be in alignment. Nothing but what you do, what you think, and what you act. All these things alignment ಆದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ that is called humanity. That is called human being. ನೀನು ತಪ್ಪು ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಹೇಳು ಧೈರ್ಯವಾಗಿ. ಎಸ್ ಈ ಚಾರ್ಟೆಲ್ಲ ಹೋದಾಗ ದೇರ್ ಈಸ್ ಸ್ಮೋಕಿಂಗ್ ಸಿಗರೇಟ್ಸ್ ಹುಡುಗರು. ನಾನೇನು ಬೈತೀನಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋದಾಗ, ಕ್ಲಾಸಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಡಿಸೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿಂದೆ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ನನ್ನ ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೇನಂತೆ ವಿಲ್ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಯು ನೋ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ಚಾಯ್ಸ್. ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಅ ಚಾಯ್ಸ್ ಟು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕನ್ಸ್ಯೂಮ್ ಟೊಬ್ಯಾಕೋ ಅಂಡ್ ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟ್ 21. ಅವ್ರಲ್ಲೇನು ಹಿಂದ್ಗಡೆ ಇಟ್ಟು ರೆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ನಂಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಇರೋದೇ ಪೆಟ್ಟಿ ಅಂಗಡಿ ಪಕ್ಕ. ಪೆಟ್ಟಿ ಅಂಗಡಿ ಪಕ್ಕ ಯಾರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ? So all those things, it is not required. It is whatever you are doing it. ಅದು ತಪ್ಪು ಅಂತ ನಿಂಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾದ್ರೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀಯ? ಇದು ತಪ್ಪು ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡು, ಧೈರ್ಯ ಮಾಡು. If it is wrong, don't repeat it. See, that is what we expect. It is self-evaluating our oneself. We need to question ourselves on continuous basis. See, I am not saying ನಾನೇನು ಪರ್ಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬೋಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋದಿಲ್ಲ. See, everyone has negatives, but interrogating oneself makes a human being. Yes or no? It is interrogating oneself. Take an example of Buddha. Now Buddha ಸಾಯೋವರೆಗೂ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವರಾಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಅಶೋಕ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯವರಾಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. And why they became great? Because they thought about oneself and they reformed oneself. ಏನು ಸರಿ ಏನು ತಪ್ಪು ಅಂತ. ಕಲಿಂಗ ವಾರ್ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಈ ಸೆಡ್ ದಟ್ ಇದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನನ್ನ ಜೀವನಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಇಷ್ಟು ಜಗಳಾಡ್ತಾನೆ, ಇಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಸಾಯಿಸಿದ, ಇಷ್ಟು ಬ್ಲಡ್ ಶೆಡ್ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. Now after that reformation took place and later on he became the Ashoka. The is nothing but great ಅಂತ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ದಾ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಅಂತ ನೆನ್ಪಿಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಇವತ್ತಿಂದ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹೆಸರು ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿ ದಾ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕಿ ಮಿಸ್ಟರ್ ಮಿಸಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಅಶೋಕ ಆಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಗ್ರೇಟರ್ ಅಶೋಕ. ಅಂಡ್ ಸೇಮ್ ಮ್ಯಾನರ್ ಬುದ್ಧ ಆಲ್ಸೋ. Now Buddha was in all luxury, but when he left the house, saying that this is not exactly luxury. Now going meeting the people, understanding the sorrowness, understanding the space for the people, he reformed himself, saying that ನನ್ನ ಲೈಫ್ ನ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀನಿ, ಲಕ್ಸುರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೀನಿ, ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ಒಂಥರ ಲಕ್ಸುರಿ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಡ್ರೈ ಫ್ರೂಟ್ಸ್ ತಿನ್ಕೊಂಡು ಆರಾಮಾಗಿ ವೈನ್ ತಿನ್ಕೊಂಡು ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೆ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನೌ ಐ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ರಿಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಸಮಥಿಂಗ್, ಐ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಪ್ರೀಚ್ ಸಮಥಿಂಗ್, ಐ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಎಜುಕೇಟ್ ಸಮಥಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ಪೀಪಲ್. And that is exactly life. He sat below, it is major we call people tree, and he reformed himself in Buddha. and after that he became Gautama Buddha. Now initially he was called as Buddha and later on he became Gautama Buddha. Yake Gautama Buddha anta kelidre? Because it is he reformed himself. Now whatever the mistakes he has done in the past, it has leave it aside and now we need to live it for the future. And with an ideological difference, with a strong strength of values. Idin madಬೇಕು. See, even in the same manner, even we have every knowledge. See, knowledge is not everything. And even ChatGPT also gives everything, Gemini also gives, Perplexity also gives every knowledge. But EIL ಏನಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ it is emotions ಇಲ್ಲ. Hope you get it. But that is the challenge we are seeing in here. Humans ಗೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಬೇಕು. But EIL ಏನು ಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ emotions ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಪ್ಲಾನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. That's the difference. But ನಮ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಏನು ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ emotions ಇರಬೇಕಿತ್ತು. But we are behind money. But AI is making more money. But AI does not require. I was reading some meme saying that AI ಏನು ಡಿಮ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ನನಗೆ ಎಮೋಷನ್ಸ್ ಕೊಡೋದವ್ರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಿರತ್ತಂತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಜನರು ಏನು ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ ನನಗೆ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಡು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಬಟ್ ದೇವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಇಂಥವ್ರಿಗೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಲಿ ನಾನು ಜಗತ್ತಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಂತ. there is some meme. I was reading some article, there was a meme. Nothing but the people does not know what is their requirement. And people demand what is requirement of others and in commonality. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ದುಡ್ಡು ಬೇಕು ನನಗೂ ದುಡ್ಡು ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡು ಅಂತ. ಎಲ್ಲರ ಹತ್ರ ಕಾರ್ ಇದೆ ನನಗೂ ಕಾರ್ ಬೇಕು, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಐಫೋನ್ ಇದೆ ನನಗೂ ಐಫೋನ್ ಬೇಕು. ಎಲ್ಲರ ಹತ್ರ ಒಂಥರ ಮೇಜರ್ ಆಗಿ ಲಕ್ಸುರಿ ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇದಾವೆ, ಲೈಕ್ ಪೀಟರ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡ್, ಲೂಯಿ ಫಿಲಿಪ್ಸ್, ಅದನ್ನು ಕೊಡು ನನಗೆ. ಈ ಥರ ನಾರ್ಮಲೈಸೇಷನ್. ಬಟ್ AI ಏನು ಕೇಳುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ಹತ್ರ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ, ನಾನು ದುಡ್ಡು ಇದೆ, ನನಗೆ ಹಣ ದುಡ್ಡು ಬರ್ತಿದೆ, ನನಗೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ನನಗೆ ಎಮೋಷನ್ಸ್ ಕೊಡೋ ದೇವ್ರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳುತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ದಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಪ್ರಿಯಾರಿಟಿ. But we need to know what exactly is required for one's life and ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತಕ್ಕಂಗೆ we should work hard. Priorities. ಯಾರು ವಯಸ್ಸಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ವಯಸ್ಸಾಗೋದಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕು, ನನ್ನ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಂತ್ ಏನು, ವಾಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮೈ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ನನಗೆ ಏನು ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ರೆ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿಯಾಗಿರ್ತೇನೆ. ನೀವು ವಯಸ್ಸಾದ್ರೆ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿಯಾಗಿರ್ತೀರಾ ಮಾಡಿ, ಇಲ್ಲ ನಾನು ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ನಾನು ನಾಲೆಜ್ ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿಯಾಗಿರ್ತೇನೆ, ಓಕೆ. ನನಗೆ ಯಾರಿಗೊಬ್ರು ಸೇವೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿಯಾಗಿರ್ತೀರಾ, open NGOs, serving NGOs. There are different methods. It is you need to interrogate yourself. What is your strength? What is your weakness? What makes you happy? What makes you joy? And every time ಮನೇಲೆ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಸ್ಕ್ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಜಗತ್ತನ್ನು ನೋಡಬೇಕು, the outside. And that gives you more experiences. ಯಾರೊಬ್ರು ಹೋಗ್ತಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಡವರಾಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಏನೋ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಹಿಂಗಿದ್ದೀರ ಅಂತ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಸೋದು, that gives you happiness, some happiness. Done. That is all those things make you happy. Now this ends are, we call it as erosion and deposition features of which one? The C things. Done. Now this ends are the things. Now you should be aware about all the things. Erosion feature and deposition feature. Now what is the erosion feature and deposition feature of the sea waves? Now we have seen about, we call it as sea cliffs. Is it fine now? Second one, sea caves, and the third one, arches. Fourth one, the stack, stump, and deposition features. We have talked about beaches. We have talked about spit bar, we have talked about batteries, we have talked about download. Done. Now we'll go for a break, and after a break we'll start with respect to R, we call it as glaciers. Done. Glaciers, Shurmana. Now we'll go for a break of some 10 or 15 minutes. Done. Next one we were called as the landforms created by which one? Glaciers. Now first one, where can you experience glaciers? Where can you experience glaciers? Now glaciers can be experienced not in Himalayas, where the temperature is lesser. Where the temperature is lesser, now automatically the liquid water gets converted into what? Glaciers. Now when we are talking about, we call it as glacial as a transportation agent which creates two types of landforms. It creates two types of landforms. Which are the two types of landforms we have? One we call it as erosional landform, and second one we call it as depositional landform. First one we call it as erosional landform, and second one we call it as depositional landforms. Now when we are talking about erosional landform, which all glacial landforms are being created here? First and foremost one we call it as Horn. First one we call it as Horn, erosional feature on. Second one we call it as Harendra. Second one we call it as Harendra. Third one we call it as Cirque. Fourth one we call it as hanging valleys. Fifth one we call it as U-shaped valleys. All this comes under, we call it as erosional landforms. How many are in number? Now we call it as, thus 5 are in number. Thus 5 comes under, we call it as Horns, Harendra, Cirque, hanging valley, U-shaped valley. U-shaped valley. This is about our 5. And second one we call it as depositional landforms. We call it as moraines. First one moraines. Second one we call it as second depositional feature. We call it as drumlins. And the third major important one, we call it as eskers. Thus the three. First one we call it as erosional feature, and second one we call it as depositional feature. Now it is erosional feature. How many are erosional feature? We call it as, it is first one we call it as the horns. Now horns and it is a peak-like structure created by the glaciers. And second one we call it as, it is Harendra, the two sides steepness. Harendra. And the third one we call it as Cirque, depression. Cirque means depression created by those, we call it as glaciers, by plucking up of the glaciers. Depression created, that is called as Cirque. And the fourth one, hanging valleys. Now when the water is flowing, it creates which one? Waterfalls. Now when it is glaciers, can it flow easily or will it look like hanging? That will see. I'll show you all the things. Is it V-shaped valleys or U-shaped valleys? Why U-shaped? Because both vertical and lateral erosion takes place because of glacial movement. And next comes our depositional features, moraines. Second one, drumlins. It's like a spoon-shaped structure, inverted spoon-shaped structure. And the third one we call it as eskers, plateaus created by the glaciers. We'll see all the things, but before starting with respect to all the things. Now tomorrow at any cost we'll complete this lithosphere, and it is from tomorrow we'll start with respect to, we call it atmosphere also. Done? See, atmosphere hardly it is 1 week. It requires 1 week on atmosphere. We'll discuss all those things. But this is a major chapter, bulkier chapter. Now if you are completing this, automatically done. Now glaciers, erosional feature and deposition feature. Example direct questions ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. Erosion ಯಾವುದು, deposition ಯಾವುದು. And I'll ask, Harendra is created by, it has which transportation agent? Harendra, ons, U-shaped valleys, hanging valleys, all these things. Done. See, whatever I am teaching, that is more than sufficient notes. And revision ಮಾಡಿ ಓದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಸಾಲ್ವ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ done again geography done. But when you are discussing about geography, you need to connect it with IR also. That is the reason I always say ಅಷ್ಟು ಬಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಓದಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ for this. See, every day you should read the newspaper first. Any newspaper, ನಾನು ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ರಿಮಿನೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ ಯಾವುದೋ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಹಿಂದೂ, ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಅಂತ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟ ಆಗೋದು ನೋಡಿ, ಬ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಓದಿ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟ. ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಓಕೆ, ಡಸಂಟ್ ಮ್ಯಾಟರ್. ಇದರ್ ಇಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಟೈಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ Hindustan Times, or it can be Live Mint, or it can be our, we call it as, it can be our government website also, All India Radio or PIB also. Be it anything, doesn't matter here. But the question is, at least every day, some 15 to 30 minutes, newspaper should be mandatory. See, newspaper ಓದದೆ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು ಯಾರು ಇಲ್ವೇ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಇಷ್ಟು ಪರ್ಸೆಂಟ್ ನಾನು ನೋಡಿ. ನೀವು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿ, ಮಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿರೋದು. ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಓದದೆ, ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ನೋಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಬಿಡಪ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೋದು, ನಾನು ಓದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. But without reading newspaper, without reading the newspaper from topics, you cannot clear this. ಎಷ್ಟಾದ್ರೂ ಸ್ಟಾಟಿಕ್ ಓದಿ, ಸ್ಟಾಟಿಕಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. But when it comes to current affairs, it is everything keeps on changing. It is ನಾನು ಇವತ್ತು ಟೀಚ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ನಾಳೆ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. It is by today itself it might update. See, we have seen that. It is in all the static books, they have said that it is coastal 320 kilometers. But we have seen in the last week there is an updation of regard to the coastal zone itself, the coastal area itself. And ಈ ತಿಂಗಳಲ್ಲೇ ಬ್ಲೂ ಫ್ಲಾಗ್ ಸರ್ಟಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ 13 ಇದ್ವಿ, 18 ಆಗಿದಾವೆ. ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದು? ಎಕ್ಸಾಮ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹಂಗೆ ಹೇಳಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ 13 ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತ? ಎಕ್ಸಾಮ್ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಹೌ ಮೆನಿ ಬೀಚಸ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ? ಬ್ಲೂ ಫ್ಲಾಗ್ ಸರ್ಟಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ 18, ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಆಪ್ಷನ್ 13. ಅದು ನೀವು ನೋಡಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಸಕ್ಕತ್ತಾಗಿದೆ, ಗ್ರೈಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಹೋಗಿ ಮಾತು. And that is the reason it is without reading current affairs, you cannot master this exam. See, that is the challenge. That is the challenge of this. ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಸತಿ AI ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಆಗಿರಲ್ಲ, AI ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. That is the challenge. And that is the reason I always say that newspaper are the best sources for UPSC. ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ UPSC ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಅವ್ರು ಓದಬೇಕಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್ ಏನು ಅಂತ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಏನು ನೋಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಹೌ ಟು ರೀಡ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್. And the third will be how the questions are being asked, MCQs. This should be your 3-pronged strategy. ಪ್ರತಿ ದಿನ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ತಗೊಂಡು ಬರಬೇಕು ಮೂರು ಬುಕ್ನ. ಒಂದು ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ತರಬೇಕು ಪ್ರತಿ ದಿನ. ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್, ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ವಿತ್ ಯು. ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್ ಇದೆ ತೋರಿಸಿ ನೋಡೋಣ. ಯು ಡೋಂಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾರ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಸರ್ ನಾವು ಜಂಜಿಗಳು, ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು ಭಾಳ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತರು ನಾವು. And how many have taken a printout of PYQs the last at least 5 to 10 years? At least on booklet ತಗೋತೀರಾ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್. ಡೂ ಅ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್. ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಯಾವ್ದು ಸರಿ ಯಾವ್ದು ತಪ್ಪು, why this option is wrong. We need to look after all those things. See, no one will teach you smartness. And I might teach you how to gain the knowledge, but I can never teach you how to be smarter. Smarter comes with only with you. ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಏನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು. ಈಗ ನೀವೇ ನೋಡಿ, ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ನೀವು ಗೆಟ್ ಟು ನೋ ಎಷ್ಟು ಓದಬೇಕು, ಎಷ್ಟು ಓದಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ. Geography is vast. Geography can also be taught to the, it is optional people also. And second one can also be taught to the officers also. But how much to read, how much not to read. And second one, it is by reading newspaper. ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲ ಓದಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ? 22-23 ಪೇಜ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಓದಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಇದ್ದು 15 ನಿಮಿಷದಲ್ಲಿ? Now when you know the syllabus, automatically comes our newspaper. What to read and what not to read. ಯಾರೋ ಸೂಸೈಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಯಾರೋ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಏನು ಇದೆ, ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. But there is a case on anti-defection law, pakka important. If there is a conflict between India and, we call it as India and Iran, India and Pakistan, becomes important. We have seen recently Lake. There is in conflict. India and China border disputes, map. Current affairs plus map. And third comes our majorly it is PYQs. See how the trend is evolving, how the questions are being asked. See, ಇದನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರ್ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು, ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಸಿಲೆಬಸ್, ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್, ಅಂಡ್ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ದ PYQs. This you should do it on simultaneous basis or on continuous basis. Some every day, some 5 to 10 minutes on syllabus. ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಜಿಯೋಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಅಂತ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ಸ್ಕ್ರೂಟನೈಸ್. ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ ನೋಡಿ. ಮೇನ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲೋ ನೋಡಿ, ವಾಲ್ಕೆನೋಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ಸ್, ಅರ್ಥಕ್ವೇಕ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ಸ್, ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಟೆಕ್ಟಾನಿಕ್ಸ್, direct makes questions. That you should do it first. And second comes R, we call it second comes R. It is newspaper ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಕು ಎಷ್ಟು ಓದಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಫಸಾಸ್ಟ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಯೂಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. Recently we have seen a person who have been working in sewage department who has died because of ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮುಳುಗೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಹಂಗೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವೇನು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಏನಾದರೂ ರೋಬೋಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ ಸೀವೇಜ್ಗೆ? ಮನುಷ್ಯರು ಆ ಸೀವೇಜ್ ಇಳಿಯೋ ಬದಲು ಟು ರಿಪೇರ್ ಆಲ್ ದೋಸ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ವಿ ಗೋ ಫಾರ್ ರೋಬೋಟ್? ಯೆಸ್ ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಡೂ ಇಟ್. ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನೇ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಸರ್ಚ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಏನು ರೋಬೋಟ್ ಹೆಂಗ್ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಿಷನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ, ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ, ಸಜೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ? And there comes our, now how are we declaring this as a disaster? So the sewage and sanitation has been declared as a disaster now because it is creating huge amount of problems. ನಿಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರುತ್ತೆ ರೋಡಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ನೀರು ಹರಿತಿರುತ್ತಲ್ವಾ, ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಅ ಗುಡ್ ವಾಟರ್, ಇಟ್ಸ್ ರಾದರ್ ಸ್ಯಾನಿಟೇಷನ್ ವಾಟರ್, ಸೀವೇಜ್ ವಾಟರ್. That you should think from an officer perspective. Yes or hope you're getting it. This three books, it is you should carry with yourself. Done? It is okay na. ಈ ಮೂರು ಅಂತೂ at least you should carry with yourself the syllabus, the original syllabus. ನನಗೆ ಫ್ಯಾಬ್ರಿಕೇಟೆಡ್ ಬೇಡ, ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ UPSC ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು, ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ತಗೋಬೇಕು. ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು, ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಔಟ್ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ಎರಡನೇದು ವಿತ್ ರೆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಟು ಆರ್ ಕರೆಂಟ್ ಅಫೇರ್ಸ್, ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ಸ್, ಸಮ್ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಟಾಪರ್ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ಗುಡ್ ವಿತ್ ರೆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಆ ಥರದ್ದು ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಇಂಪ್ರೂವ್ ಯುವರ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್, ದ ಸ್ಪೀಕಿಂಗ್ ಆಸ್ ವೆಲ್ as writing also. That will be helpful in your mains also. And third one you should pick up the most important topics so that topic should be important from our prelims also, mains also. Both major comes are major one we call it as RPQs. Now UPSC trend in ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, CDS ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ, NDA ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ, CRPF, or it can be UPSC CS examination. How the questions are being asked, how the trend is being evolving. Go to Telegram, go in PYQs, UPSC PYQ channel and search ಮಾಡಿ. You will get some 100 of the channel and another search ಮಾಡಿ. It is related to NDA, related to CDS, all those things. ಪ್ರತಿದಿನ some 10 sufficient. And you will get to know some ideas. Some everyday 50. ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಪಂಚ ಸಾಲ್ವ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಪಂಚ ಸಾಲ್ವ್ ಮಾಡಿ. See, one who values the time, automatically time will also value you. ನೀವೇನೋ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಏನೋ ಮಜಾ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರೆ you should be smarter. See, ಆಫೀಸರ್ ಆಗೋದು ನೀವು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಸೂಪರ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ಒಂದು IAS ಆಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಗೆ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮೇಜರ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಬ್ಬರು DC ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಆ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಗೆಲ್ಲ ನೀವೇ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತರಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. ಆ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತರಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯರ ಥರ ಇರೋದಲ್ಲ. ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಬಿ ಲೈಕ್ ಅ ಕಾಮನ್ ಪೀಪಲ್, ರಾದರ್ ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಮೋರ್ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟರ್. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತರ ನೋಡಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅವ್ರ ಜಾತಕ ಏನು ಅಂತ, ಯಾರು ಕ್ವಾಲಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ಸ್ ಏನು, ಅವ್ರು ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅಷ್ಟು ಯು ಶುಡ್ ಡಿರೈವ್ ಆಲ್ ದೋಸ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್. It's all. It is always and always you should have that smartness and ಅದು ನೋಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, you should experience more. ಮನೇಲಿ ಇದ್ರೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ಮೆಟಾನ್ ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡೋದು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇನ್ ಮೆಟಾ ಮೆನಿ ಆರ್ ಅನಾನಿಮಸ್. ಯಾರೋ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಯಾರೋ ಫೋಟೋ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ನೈನ್ ಥರ ಫೋಟೋ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಬಟ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಯಾರು ಹುಡುಗ. So all the things we are experiencing it. In the present cyber generation we are seeing all those things. See, ಅದನ್ನ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಮೂರಂತೂ ಪಕ್ಕಾ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಲಿ, ಓಕೆನಾ? Erosional as well as deposition features. Done. It is majorly, it is glaciers and like glaciers ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ now where can you experience glaciers? I have already said glaciers. It is majorly when the temperature is very lesser. Now where can you experience in our complete we call it as Earth. In our complete Earth, where can you experience glaciers? Now in our polar regions, the South Pole and North Pole, South Pole and North Pole, and this we call it as equator. Now the South Pole and North Pole we call it as are the glacial formation, and in India we also have our third pole of the world. And which is the third pole of the world? We call it as Himalayas. Then Himalayas, this Himalayas we call it as what is this Himalayas? Third pole of the earth. This Himalayas we call it as third pole of the earth. Clear boss? Now this third pole of the earth, now Himalayas passes through how many countries of the Himalayas? Highest peak of Himalayas? Mount Everest. Present in which country? Nepal. It's also called as peak 15. And second, how Himalayas are found? Not even. Now whatever mountain is this? Young-fold mountains. Why it is called young-fold mountains? Because it is continuously increasing. And the third major important one, now what is the usefulness of Himalayas? Nam Himalayas yaak ಬೇಕು. Himalayas yaak ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ? Reduce wind from where?
Reduce the rainfall.
It retrieves the rainfall. No. Now the first and foremost one, this Himalayas are, it is around 3000 meters height on an average. If that is the case, don't you think it blocks the winds, the cold winds that are coming from Siberia or Russia? Yes or no, boss? Now why India is called as tropical and subtropical climatic condition? Because the first and foremost one, we call it as Himalayas acts as a barrier for the winds that are coming from, we call it as Siberia towards India. It's been blocking it. The cold winds are being blocked first. And second one, the second major important one, we call it as this Himalayas is a source of n number of rivers. Origination of areas we call it as perennial rivers, continuous flow of rivers. Is that continuous? The river which flows via, we call it as, which flows via or which originates from Himalayas. Which is that? Take an example of Brahmaputra. Take an example of Indus. Take an example of Ganga. Take an example of Teesta. Take an example of n number of tributaries which originates from where? Himalayas. Second advantage. Third advantage here is, now these Himalayas are also being useful for a climatic condition called as alpine climatic condition. What do you mean by alpine climatic condition? The cold climatic condition. Now the climatic condition is being experienced in North Pole and South Pole. We can experience that type of climatic condition even in India also. Though it is present near to equator, but we are experiencing, we call it as alpine type of climatic condition. Yes or no? And the fourth major important one, we call it as, it also brings monsoon rainfall to India because of blocking. Now winds are being carrying, it will block adag matte namge male barutade. It is not carrying that winds to the China or Tibet. Rather it is bringing rainfall to India. It is blocking the monsoonal rains. And it is bringing rainfall to India. It is bringing rainfall to India. There are n number of advantages. And the Himalayas acts as the natural boundary between the bordering countries. India and China, India and Nepal, India and Bhutan, which is acting as what? Natural boundary between these countries. Natural boundary act. All those things are the advantages of, we call it as third pole of the earth. Now in this third pole of the earth, not only this, we also have origination of various glaciers. We have various glaciers. The most important, the highest and the largest glacier of the world, we call it as Siachen Glacier. Now outside North Pole and South Pole, which is the largest glacier we have? Siachen Glacier. Where is Siachen Glacier? It's in Ladakh. Siachen Glacier, observe Siachen Glacier. To the north of it is, we call it as Kargil. Observe in physical map you will get Sigler with Siachen Glacier in the middle. Yes or no? No? Page number 16. Alright. Siachen Glacier. It's in Ladakh. Present day Ladakh. Done. Now all those things comes under glaciers. Now is this glacier static or does it move? It moves. Now when it is moving, it is creating the erosional and depositional features. Now when it is plucking something, it is leading to a creation of erosional feature. Now whatever it is being plucked, it is depositing somewhere. And this deposition leading to the formation of which one? Leading to the formation of, we call it as depositional features. Shall we see all this in one by one? Now first and foremost one, our intro part is done now, and we will talk about majorly we call it as, we will talk about, it is a different erosional feature which are being created by, we call it as erosional feature. Erosional feature created by glaciers. Erosional feature created by glaciers. Now I said that the first one we call it as horn. Now what do you mean by horn, boss? What do you mean by horn? See this. What is horn? Now a peak-like structure. The peak-like structure, because one glacier in move ಆಗ್ತದೆ, pluck ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಿದೆ. Now glacier is not moving silently. It is plucking the soil and it is moving. And when it is plucking and moving, it is leading to all three sides like a peak-like structure, mountain-like structure, hill-like structure, and that hill we call it as what? That hill we call it as horn. That hill we call it as horn. That hill we call it as horn. First one. Done. Second one. Now if it is two side steepness, now this horn I said three side steepness. If it is two side steepness, observe this. Now we can observe from front now. Now observe this arete. Observe this arete. Now two side steepness. Now one kade towards east move ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆ west move ಆಗ್ತದೆ. But it is leading to which one? A two side steepness. And a two side steepness we call as what? It is arete. If it is a peak-like structure, horn. If it is two side steepness, arete. All this comes under erosional deposition feature. Erosion feature. And the third one we call it as the third one. Now the third major important one I have said. Third major important one. Now we call it as, it is this. Now a depression which is being created. A depression which is being created, and that depression we call it as what? That depression. Now pluck ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಡಿಪ್ರೆಷನ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ಹಾಳ ಬೀಳ್ತಿದೆ. ನಾವು ಹಾಳ ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಏನಾಗ್ತಿದೆಯಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮೇಜರ್ಲಿ we call it as, now that depression. See this? That depression we call which one? Cirque. Now depression is being created. Now will that depression be like a depression, or will it fill, or water will start to fill this depression? Water will start to fill this depression. Now water fill ಆದಾಗ ಅದು ಏನಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ glacial lake ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. First one, a depression we call it as a cirque. That depression we call it as cirque. Now the cirque will be filled with water, and this water gets converted into glacier because of low temperature, and that lake we call it as what? Glacial lake. ಅಂತ ವಿಂಟರ್ ಬರಲಿ ನೋಡಿ ನೀವು ಗ್ಲೇಷಿಯಲ್ ಲೇಕ್ ಔಟ್ಬರ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ತೀರಾ ಹಿಮಾಲಯಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ. Glacial lake will start to suddenly outburst. Now why will it start to suddenly outburst? Why will it start to suddenly outburst? Why? Because of temperature. Now sudden agi glacier will start to move suddenly, and that leads to a disaster, and that we call it as glacial lake outburst. Third one, a depression created by a glacier because of the movement of the glaciers, and while it is moving it is plucking the soil, and when it is plucking the soil it is leading to which one? Depression. And this depression is being filled by water, and that water we call it as which one? Glacial lake. And over a period of time, because of changing climate change, this can lead to an outburst, overflow of water, overflow of glaciers. And this overflow of glaciers we call it as glacial lake outburst. And this glacial lake outburst has been declared as a disaster. It has been declared as, we call it as a disaster. This we call it as what? This we call it as what? This we call it as major which one? Cirque. Cirque, glacial lake, and glacial lake outburst. We have seen all those things. With respect to our which one? With respect to our we call it as The horns, horn means what? Now three-side steepness. Horn means we call it as the three-side steepness. We call it as what? Now three-side steepness, we call it as horns. Arete means two sides. Cirque means a depression created. And next one we call it as, we will talk about, the next one we will talk about, or which one? Our major important one, we call it as U-shaped valleys, and we call it as hanging U-shaped valleys, and we call it as hanging waterfalls. Hanging waterfalls. Observe this verse. Now, is it like a V-shaped one or is it U-shaped? Why it is U-shaped? Because glaciers are in the form of solid. When it is in the form of solid, rather than going for very deep manner, it starts to erode on the sideways. And that sideways erosion we call it what? Lateral erosion. That sideways erosion we call it as lateral erosion. That sideways erosion we call it as lateral erosion. Okay, now boss. U-shape, you got it? But the question is, think that if it is water, aram se it will flow. Think that if it is glacier, will it aram se flow? अथवा एक्सेल बंद निकलता है. If it is water, aram se it can flow. But think that now we have a waterfall that is flowing from top to bottom, from upper higher land to the lower regions. But will glacial, aram se can it flow? Or it will look like an hanging one? Think that if it is water, think that this are island and these are lowland. Now the question is, if it is water, what happens? If it is water, what happens? Now water flows and automatically defaults. But think that now it is a glacier. Now if it is glacier, can it flow? Or if it is moving also, at some point of time, it will look like this. Rather than aram se flowing it like a liquid, it is a solid one. We cannot bend this solid. Now, over a period of time, from the observer, how will it look like? Hanging. Valley is hanging. It look like hanging. ನಾನು ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಹ್ಯಾಂಗ್ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ, ಬಟ್ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಯಾವ ಟೈಮ್ ನಾನು ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬೀಳುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. It will start to break after some point and it will start to suddenly collapse. That's the reason geography is important. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೋಡಬಾರ್ದು ಮೇಲೆಲ್ಲ, ನೋಡಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ವೈಟ್ ಇದ್ರೆ ಓಡೋಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಈಗ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅವೆಲ್ಲ ನೋಡ್ತೀರ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ತಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಬೀಳುತ್ತೆ, ಪಚ್ಚಡಿ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. Because solid is very risky. Water you can tolerate, but solid is very risky. And this leads to formation of, we call it as hanging valleys. This we call it as hanging valleys. Clear was? This we call it as hanging valleys. Clear? Done? All this comes under erosion features. Doubt?
How can we explain that hanging valleys?
I'll discuss. Okay. First one. Now hanging valleys. You cannot explain some things.
No, sir. I meant while like defining it.
While defining it, it is looking like an hanging one. It is glaciers are moved rather than flowing easily. Now it is looking like an hanging one. Now that is an erosional feature which is being created by, we call it as our glaciers. Okay. Note down one by one. First one is the on, clear. Now what is on here? Now majorly on we call it as the erosional feature which is being created by the glaciers, and that leads to creation of what? It is hill-like structure or a peak-like structure, and that peak-like structure we call it horn. Done. Second one. What is the second one? It is arete. What does arete means? It is two sides steepness. And the third one is cirque. What is cirque here? It is a depression created by, we call it as a glacier because of erosional feature, the plucking up of the glaciers. Depression, and that's being filled by water, and that we call it as glacial lake. And the fourth one we call it as hanging valleys. What's hanging valleys here? It is a glacier rather than flowing easily like a waterfall. glacial, rather than flowing easily like a waterfall, it looks like hanging. It looks like hanging from the observer. From the observer who are standing below or who are observing below, and that we call it as hanging valleys. And the last one, what is the last one? Last one we call it as U-shaped valleys. U-shaped valleys. Done? U-shaped valleys. Why U-shaped valleys happens? Because of lateral and vertical erosion. Because of vertical and lateral erosion, U-shaped valleys are created. Where can you experience V-shaped valleys? Running water or river water, V-shaped valleys, because of more vertical erosion rather than lateral erosion. In glaciers, both lateral and vertical erosion happens. It is almost on same manner. That's the reason we call it as U-shaped valleys are being created. Clear? Fine. Hanging valleys are in a similar manner. It is an observer. It looks like an hanging valley. It is like an hanging. Done. Thus we call it as hanging valleys are being created. This is about our erosion feature. Now, which is our deposition feature? Which is our deposition feature? First one we call it as, first one I have said moraines. First one I said moraines. Moraines. Now when we are talking about moraines, now be cautious here. When we are talking about moraines, we have three types of moraines. There are three types of moraines. Now moraine means deposition of the sediments. Now there are three types of moraines. One we call it as lateral moraine. What do you mean lateral moraine? What do you mean by lateral moraine? Lateral means on sideways. Lateral moraine. Lateral moraine. The deposition happens on the sideways. If the deposition happens on the middle between two glacial movement, this is glacial. Glacial move. Now between two glacial, if the deposition happens on the middle, opposite, or we call it as deposition happens on the middle, and that we call it what? Median moraine. It's not middle moraine, it is medial moraine. Second one. Medial. If it is at the end, terminal moraine. End we call it as a terminal moraine. Okay now. If it is on sideways, we call it as lateral moraine. Middle we call it as medial moraine, and the last one we call which one? Last one, if it is on the middle, we call it as it is medial moraine. We call it as medial moraine. Done, boss? Clear? This we call it as sideways lateral moraine, medial moraine, and the last one we call it as terminal moraine. Terminal moraine. Clear? Done. That's about our first one. What is moraine here? It's a deposition created by the movement of glaciers. We call it as moraines. Clear? Now moraines are of three types. One we call it as lateral moraine. What does lateral means? Sideways. If it is in the middle, we call it as medial moraine. If it is at the end, terminal. Perfect. You got a point here? It is moraines. Medial moraine, terminal moraine, as well as lateral moraine, we call it as moraines. Clear? Done. This we call it as moraines. And the second one we call it as drumlins. You know what drumlins is? Now drumlins ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಇದೆಯಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ inverted spoon shaped structure. That we call it as drumlins. That we call it as drumlins. That we call it as drumlins. Drumlins. Now I have already said what do you mean by drumlins here. Now inverted we call it as a spoon shaped structure. See this? Now if the glaciers are carrying the materials, now which materials will be carried for the larger distance? Will it be large boulders, will it carry for the larger distance, or the smaller materials will be carried for the larger distance? Smaller materials are being carried for larger distance. Now this we call it as smaller materials. Here there will be which one? Here there will be large boulders. Now where can you experience more amount of fertility, and where can you experience it as cultivation of agriculture, or where can you experience rich amount of biodiversity? Is it at the end, near to the tail, or near to the head? Near to the tail. Why near to the tail? I already said it is water escapes here and re-emerges here. This we call it as Babar and Taraj. But when we are talking about Jammu and Kashmir, glacial impact. Now this smaller fertile soil we call it as Kareva formation. Are you getting it? Now Kareva formation, it is the soil are highly fertile. Why it is highly fertile? Because the soil it is formed via the depositional feature of glaciers, and this is occurring every year. And if it is occurring every year, that too very smaller sediments, and these smaller sediments are rich with respect to fertility. And in this rich fertility, we will be growing a saffron. And you know, it is which country is the largest producer of saffron? Iran. And second one within India, which state is the largest producer of, we call it as saffron on the credit, Jammu and Kashmir. State of UT, it is Jammu and Kashmir is the largest producer of saffron because of a very good deposition feature created by we call it as glaciers, and that we call it as Kareva formation or the drumlins. The landform we call it as drumlin, and the soil which is formed here we call it as Kareva formation. And this Kareva formation, it has also been added under GIAS also. Sakkat important idu GIAS. ಏನಪ್ಪ GIAS ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ globally important agricultural heritage system by FAO. ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಮೂರೇ GIAS ಅಲ್ಲಿ. One in Jammu and Kashmir, Kareva formation famous for saffron cultivation, and second one Kuttanad. Kuttanad, it's in Kerala, underwater cultivation of rice, Kuttanad. And the third one Koraput in Odisha. Only 3 sites we have: Koraput in Odisha, Kuttanad in Kerala, and the third one we call it as Kareva formation in Jammu and Kashmir has been added under GIAS of FAO. What is GIAS? Geographically important, it is agricultural heritage system by FAO. What is FAO? Food and Agricultural Organization. Food and Agricultural Organization, only 3 agricultural systems are being given under GIAS. Think about how important is this. Now this we call it as drumlins. The flow of the glaciers, the direction of the former glacial flow. Now here the large boulders will start to deposit. This is the head and this is tail. Large boulders, see this, large boulders are being dumped. It is farther from the location will be depositing the smaller sediments. And at smaller sediments we call it as smaller sediments which are rich in fertility. And at fertile soil in Jammu and Kashmir we call it as Kareva formation. Example ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, Kareva formation has been formed by the influence of which one? Glaciers. And the soil, is it fertile or not fertile? It is highly fertile. Highly fertile. And this is famous for cultivation of which crop? Saffron cultivation. You know saffron cultivation. One churu kottibittu 100 rupees kodi anತಾರೆ. Which is very costly. Yes sir. Which is very costly saffron cultivation, and the saffron cultivate ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ the most important agricultural heritage system tag to us. Done boss. Done. This we call it as, see, geography is not about theory boss. It's more about practicality. It's more about advancement. That is reason ನಿಮಗೆ ನಾನು ಪ್ರತಿದಿನ ಏನಕ್ಕೆ it is images ತೋರಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ PPT ನಾನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ easy, ಸಖತ್ easy. Because I need to show you some number of pictures, so that even you will feel okay ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಇಷ್ಟೆಲ್ಲ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ. PPT are static. That is the reason I search here and I show you the different pictures. Hope you get it. That we call it as, it is the Kareva formation also. Clear? The next one we call it as, last one we call it as eskers. The last one we call it as eskers. Now eskers is again we call it as, it's a plateau region created by glaciers. A simpler manner, eskers antandre it's a we call it as, it's a plateau region which is being created by, we call it as plateau region created by, it is the plateau region created by the deposition of, it is glacial deposits. Plateau region. Plateau on the tableland topography. Plateau means tableland topography, and you should know about drumlands, you should know about terminal moraines, all those things. You know it? Drumlands, followed by moraines, all those things. Done? This is all with respect to our, we call it as our major important one, erosional and transitional landforms created by which one? It is glacial moraines. Now when we are coming back to this, now is it fine now? Have we discussed about everything here? Now when we are talking about moraines, there are three types of moraines here. Which is our type of moraines? One we call it as lateral moraine, terminal moraine, and the last one we call it as medial moraine. If it is the middle, medial, and terminal, if it is on the lateral or a sideways, we call it as lateral moraines. Second one, drumlins. Drumlins and the automatically, drumlins are nothing but inverted spoon-shaped structure. Inverted spoon-shaped structure, it is created by the deposition features of, we call it as, created by the deposition features of which one? Glaciers. Nothing but this is we call a head and this is we call a tail. Escarps are nothing but the plateau regions or the tableland topography created by the glaciers. We call it as the glacial landforms. Done. We are left with hardly some half an hour to 1 hour of the class with respect to this chapter. It is that we will discuss in the next class, and in the next class itself we will be migrating into it is the second most important part. We call it as atmospheric part. Done. In next class, at any cost, it is in the tomorrow. We will move towards the atmosphere. Now we will talk about what is atmosphere. Second one, atmosphere is made up of different gases, and the third one we will talk about the different layers of atmosphere. What is the troposphere, stratosphere, meso, thermo, exo, ionosphere, all those things we will see. And after this we will also talk about it is how temperature is the most important one. Not only land is important, even atmosphere is also important. How temperature is influencing India. What is solar insolation? What is heat budget of the earth? We will talk about what is normal lapse rate, what is inverse normal lapse rate. We will talk about how rainfalls are formed, how clouds are formed, how we call it as cyclones are being formed. Now we'll see all those things A to Z in our, we call it as atmospheric part. Done? That we'll discuss tomorrow, and this is all for today. And in case if there is a doubt, I can handle that. If not, we'll not. Any doubts? Revising the content at least on daily basis. Done. At least NCERT 11th and 12th, it is mandatory ಓದಲೇ ಬೇಕು. 11th and 12th, mandatorily you should read this. These 4 books are more than sufficient for geography course. ನೀವು ಇದನ್ನು ಓದ್ತಿದ್ರೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಪಟ್ಪಟ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿರುತ್ತೆ, because everything I have thought. ಇದನ್ನು ಓದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದ್ರೆ fast you can revise. And in case if you are not understanding any of the things, you can come back to me and you can ask, sir, ಇದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸತಿ explain ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ I will explain it. And classes ಮುಗಿದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾನು ರಿಕ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾನೇನು ಮಾಡಲಿ? See, that you should do it simultaneously. It is physical. Now Indian geography also you can start, because I am doing it simultaneously. Indian geography also, majority Indian geography I have discussed. It is only you should apply on the ground. Only apply on the ground. You can talk about the tribal groups which are present, and Himalayas is gottide namge, Aravalis gottide, Satpuras, Vindhyas. We are aware about Western Ghats, Eastern Ghats, Andaman Nicobar. All those things are done. Now all these things I need to consolidate ashte. I have discussed everything, but if I consolidate all these things, physiography division is done with the game. ಅಷ್ಟನ್ನ ಕನ್ಸಲ್ಟೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಷ್ಟೇ, and that consolidation happens within some 1 or 2 classes. You are aware, you know, at least you can imagine where is Andaman, where is Lakshadweep, capital ಏನು, and how it has been formed. Andaman ಹೆಂಗೆ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, Lakshadweep ಹೆಂಗೆ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, where is our peninsular India, where is Aravalis, where is we called as Satpuras, Vindhyas, where is Malda Gap, Rajmahal Gap. You are aware about Garo, Kasi and Jaintia also. You are aware about Naga Hills, you are aware about Lusha Hills or Mizo Hills. You are aware about Himalayas. Himalayas again divided into 3 things. You are aware about Trans Himalayas, Krishnagiri Himalayas. You are aware about, we call it as the reverse touch madi. At least you are aware about all those things. Done. Tomorrow we will touch about reverse also. Not an issue. We will talk about Godavari, at least Kaveri, Krishna, or it can be our Mahanadi, or it can be our Ganga, Brahmaputra. All those things you are aware. Done. Ganga in it is Bangladesh. It is called as which one? Ganga in Bangladesh. Padma in Bangladesh. Second one, Brahmaputra in Bangladesh. Jamuna. And where do meet adaga? Meet adaga we call it as Meghana. Then ella ikkudilla guru. It is Sundarbans we have discussed about. It is Sundarbans also meeting point, or we call it as this Ganga and Brahmaputra. When it is finally flowing it into it is ocean, we call it Sundarbans or Ganga Brahmaputra delta. Done. Apply this on ground. ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮ್ಯಾಪ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿರಬೇಕು, ನೋಡ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. Done. That's all for today. Thank you. See you all. Yes.